In late September, news arrived that Brudians had intruded into Tarina. In reality, the Brudii Tribal League was aggressively purging tribes that refused to join them, forcing refugees to flee. I seized the opportunity, ordering Aristolas to spread rumors that the Brudii were preparing a massive invasion of Dionia, reminding the public of their past atrocities. Fear and anger swept through Dionian cities, with citizens demanding war to eliminate the threat. By early October, with the harvest complete, the public mood made war inevitable. The Senate formally declared war on the Brudii, citing their refusal to heed warnings and their destruction of the allied Siru tribe. The Brudii war began. Legions mobilized across Asprostum, Thurii, Amendalara, and Nerulum, while the 3rd Legion remained in Grimentum to maintain stability. Amidst preparations, I met with Hegesidas, leader of the Siru survivors. "We have declared war," I promised. "The Brudii will pay for their slaughter of our Greek kin." Tears in his eyes, Hegesidas thanked me, calling me the god-favored of Hades and a guardian of justice. "We will pray for your victory and safe return." "What is your request?" I asked. "My people and I wish to join your army," Hegesidas declared, "to fight alongside you and avenge our kin." I politely but firmly rejected Hegesidas's request to join the army, explaining that Dionian soldiers are strictly disciplined and that incorporating irregulars would disrupt their ranks and complicate military law enforcement. Hegesidas, disappointed, desperately offered their services as scouts instead. I noted that only a few scouts were needed, but sensing an opportunity, I proposed a task that could strike a decisive blow against the Brudii Tribal League. Hegesidas eagerly asked what it was. I suggested they return to the Brudii region to incite the tribes that were forced into the League against their will. Once the Dionian army invaded, these tribes could revolt, making the League's defeat inevitable. I acknowledged the danger of their return. Empty. Hegesidas, his spirit reignited, firmly declared they would do anything to defeat Cosentia. News of the war spread across Magna Graecia. Castron immediately pledged 1,000 infantry and 50 cavalry to the Dionian cause. Laos followed suit, promising 3,000 infantry. Heraclea, the newest ally, pledged 500 infantry and 100 cavalry. I accepted these offers. While these forces were smaller than my legions, their participation strengthened the alliance and allowed Dionia to gradually influence and assimilate their military systems. Tarentum's Senate was conflicted. A Dionian victory would widen the gap between them, but a defeat might embolden the Messapians and Pusetians. Exhausted by their own recovery, they couldn't provide military aid, yet felt obligated to respond due to Dionia's recent help. Tarentum sent an envoy, Polydorus, to Thurii to politely inquire if Dionia needed assistance. Seeing Polydorus's awkwardness, I thanked him for the concern but stated that Dionia required no help. My confident refusal left Polydorus feeling both relieved and slightly guilty. Croton and its allies, Cilicium, Tarina, Colonia, were also pressured to show support as members of the South Italy alliance, despite many hoping for a Dionian defeat. The Dionian Senate declined their request to send troops, citing their need to guard against Locri. Instead, they requested food supplies and permission for Dionian troops to pass through their territory to attack the Brudii from the Tarina side. The envoys agreed. The Cilicium envoy even boasted that they would provide free grain to the Dionian forces attacking from Tarina. The Tarina envoy, though quiet, understood that Dionia had already made a secret pact with Cypros to attack Napisha, using this request as a cover. Geninate excitedly told his father, Sensing, that the Vigians were right about the war. Sensing sneered, questioning if they should declare war on Dionia. He reminded his son of their hatred for Sidorums and noted that they only spared the Vigian envoy because of Aelia. Since losing Grimentum, small Lacanian tribes had flocked to Dionia. Despite the Archon's promises of peace, the cunning Sensing remained deeply suspicious. The news of Aelia joining the Dionian alliance shocked Pixis, leaving them surrounded. Fearing for their survival, Pixis and Potentia decided to unite against Dionia. Sensing told his son to be patient. He waited for the Dionians and Brudii to exhaust each other, hoping Potentia would strike first. In Cosentia, the leaders of the Brudii Tribal League met to discuss intelligence reports. Pianluan reported that I had mobilized the 1st and 2nd Legions toward Laos, while the 4th Legion moved south, signaling a full-scale invasion. Nikilu reacted with aggressive excitement, eager to prove their strength. Sidorums expressed deep concern, noting that the main attack would likely hit Vergay with a force of 20,000, which the 4,000 defenders could not withstand. Nikilu mocked Sidorums for his cowardice. Panjuru defended Sidorums, arguing that Napisha also needed reinforcements against the 10,000-strong force approaching from Tarina. Sidorums nodded in gratitude. High Priest Faladaru invoked their divine heritage, urging unity to overcome this test from the goddess Amara and the hero Brutus. Pianluan announced he would lead 10,000 Cosentian warriors to reinforce Vergay. Sidorums thanked him profusely for committing nearly all of Cosentia's strength. Pianluan emphasized that the League's survival depended on mutual defense, warning the others that if one city fell, the rest would follow. Bojamu pledged 3,000 warriors to defend Napisha, noting the strategic advantage of their mountain terrain. Nikilu followed suit, promising 2,000 warriors to help Panjuru defend against the Dionian forces. Panjuru expressed his gratitude to the two great chieftains. Faladaru praised their unity, chanting to Brutus and declaring that as long as the Bruttians stood together, no number of Greeks could defeat them. Pianluan warned the leaders to remain vigilant against the cunning Archon of Dionia, citing his past deceptions at Croton, Nerulum, and Grimentum. Bojamu assured him that every mountain peak in the valley was guarded, ensuring no Dionian movement would go unnoticed. Nikilu added confidently that the Biciniathrii River path was blocked by their fortified camps, ready to annihilate any invaders. Pianluan nodded, though he lacked authority over the individual tribes. He turned to Sidorums, asking if the newly allied Pixis and Potentia would attack the Dionians. Sidorums doubted it, noting that since the Dionians were the aggressors, the cunning Sinsing would not strike first unless the Dionians suffered a major defeat. Pianluan rallied the group, urging them to hold the Brutii Mountains for a month. He predicted that supply issues and a Lucanian uprising would cripple the Dionians, allowing them to counterattack and seize the fertile plains. The speech ignited the crowd, with Nikilu shouting for the defeat of the Dionians. Building mountain roads was a complex engineering feat despite ongoing efforts on the Thurilaus Road. It remained unfinished, forcing me to spend 5 days navigating the mountains with my army and supplies to reach the La River fortress. Meanwhile, Hieronymus and the 4th Legion arrived at Tarina, where they were warmly welcomed by the local generals and council members. Hieronymus declined an invitation to a banquet, choosing to remain with his soldiers, earning the admiration of the local officials. He camped his army 10 miles northwest of Tarina, near the coastal pass leading to Napisha. After securing the camp, Hieronymus and Cypros scouted the outskirts of Napisha. Napisha was a bottleneck, blocking the narrow coastal road to the Cosenza Plateau. The city was small, built of blue stone, with 4-meter walls on high ground. The approach was narrow and steep, forcing soldiers to endure enemy projectiles, though the troops were trained for such terrain. Hieronymus assessed the road, considering whether the 3rd Legion's new siege engines could be deployed there. Cypros, fearing Hieronymus was intimidated, suggested there were mountain paths to bypass the city and reach Cosenza. Really? Hieronymus asked, turning sharply. Yes, that is how the Silu and other rebels escaped Brutium. Hieronymus asked if the people of Napisha knew of these paths. Cypros confirmed they did. Hieronymus decided to send scouts later and inquired about the city's port. Cypros confirmed the port existed but was small, then dismounted to look over the cliff. Hieronymus followed suit, cautious of his own horsemanship on the dangerous cliffside. There, Cypros pointed into the strong sea wind. From the 100-meter-high cliff, Hieronymus saw a small beach with a primitive pier and a few ships near the mouth of the Savuto River. The Savuto River? Cypros explained that the Savuto Valley led north to Cosenza. He mocked the Bruttians for building the city far from the river to avoid Tarina's raids, forcing them to build a separate, unfortified settlement by the river for farming. Hieronymus interrupted, asking about the settlement's defenses. Hearing it had no walls, he felt relieved. He was glad he wouldn't need to siege the settlement after taking the city. Cypros noted that while the port had little trade, the new Brutii tribal league would likely develop it rapidly. Hieronymus nodded, unaware that the Bruttians had already used this port to bypass the Dionian blockade and secure their new alliances. As a group of soldiers charged out of the Nepetia Gate, Hieronymus ordered his men to return to camp. Nicula laughed mockingly, calling the Dionians cowards. I arrived at the La River fortress, where Sicida and Hieronymus were waiting. Sicida reported that the people of Nerulum were mobilized to support the army with supplies, camp construction, and medical aid. Do the Lacanian tribes have any objections? I asked. Sicida laughed, explaining that the Lacanians welcomed the conquest of the Bruttians, feeling safer as Dionia grew stronger. He joked that the Dionian soldiers were becoming quite popular with the local Lacanian women. I laughed, remarking on how far Sicida had come from his days as a simple mercenary. Sicida agreed, noting that he never imagined he would hold public office, crediting me for the incredible transformation of their lives. I praised Sicida for his administrative success in Nerulum, noting that despite his background as a mercenary, he had transformed the region into a stable Daunian territory. I promised him even greater responsibilities after his term. Sicida felt proud, but humbly replied that I remained the most experienced administrator among them. I laughed, deflecting the credit by claiming I was merely favored by Hades. The group erupted in laughter. Hieronymus interrupted, anxiously asking about the Third Legion's role in the upcoming war, as they had been excluded from previous mobilizations. I reflected on Hieronymus, a man who lived in the barracks and had earned the deep loyalty of his Lacanian soldiers despite being Greek. Empty. I explained that the Third Legion was vital for stabilizing Lucania. I questioned whether Pixis and Potentia would exploit the war against the Bruttians to reclaim Gramentum. Sicida and Hieronymus pondered this possibility. Hieronymus asked if his legion was to remain stationary to defend against potential incursions. I smiled, stating that if those cities broke their peace treaties, Dauniya would conquer them alongside the Bruttians. The two men were shocked by the Archon's boldness and concerned about fighting on two fronts. I mentioned Elia, though Sicida dismissed their military strength. Hieronymus, however, realized the plan and eagerly agreed to coordinate with Batel to lure the enemy. I added that I would secure port access from Avanogus. I greeted the Laos Archon, Avanogus, teasing him about his weight gain. Avanogus laughed, attributing his comfort to Dauniya's protection and expressing his only concern, missing out on new dishes from my wife's restaurant. I advised him to lose weight for his health. Avanogus, remembering I was a physician, agreed to try controlling his weight. I noted Avanogus's lack of genuine commitment to his health. I lamented that Avanogus had become complacent and gluttonous, leaving administrative duties to his brother, Arabumas. Arabumas noticed something unusual about the passing Second Legion and voiced his confusion. Avanogus silenced him, citing new equipment, and ordered him to seal the ports and city gates in preparation for the war. I admired Avanogus's sharp political and military instincts, which remained intact despite his physical decline. Bruttian forces harassed the retreating Greeks with rocks and logs. Capus watched with frustration, lamenting that the terrain nullified their legion's strength. Antonius noted that they had at least advanced their lines by capturing an enemy camp. Capus countered that the enemy had abandoned it voluntarily, and they had suffered 300 casualties without even engaging the Bruttians. Antonius reassured him that most injuries were treatable and that casualties were inevitable in war. Amyntas complained about the slow progress and the difficult terrain, questioning why the Second Legion hadn't acted yet. Alexis defended the strategy, noting that the First Legion was used as bait to draw the Bruttian main force toward them. Capus signaled for silence, hoping the Second Legion's mission would justify their losses. A Bruttian scout reported the Greek retreat. Saru was disappointed, wishing they had trapped the Greeks in the mountain pass to inflict more casualties. Sidorums praised Saru for holding the line for 3 days and inflicting losses on the strongest Daunian legion. Saru expressed confidence that they could keep the Greeks from reaching Vigia for a month and complained about the presence of the Cosentians. Sidorums urged patience, emphasizing the need for unity and warning against underestimating the Daonians, who had yet to deploy their full strength. Saru clenched his fists, determined. Sidorums urged Saru, noting that while the Greeks were repelled at Clampetia, they must remain vigilant against the Lacanians. He insisted that the presence of the main army in Kosincha allowed them to fight confidently. Saru nodded in silence. Sidorums grew excited, arguing that the longer the Dionians delayed reaching Vigia, the more their morale and supplies would dwindle, paving the way for a Brution triumph. Sunset faded, and darkness enveloped the land. Herdsmen retreated, and children were called home as the mountains became the domain of wild beasts at night. The wilderness outside Bycinia was deserted. Only the roaring Crathis River broke the silence. The residents, accustomed to the sound, slept peacefully, believing the river's roar offered them protection. Unbeknownst to them, thousands of Dionian soldiers were advancing through the woods on the opposite bank, their movements masked by the river's thunderous noise. The Crathis River featured steep cliffs, but a 10-meter-long beach near Bycinia served as a water source. 40 meters upstream lay a gentle slope leading to a rocky outcrop capable of hiding 10 men. A winch was fixed among the rocks, coiled with thick rope attached to a muscular man wearing only a harness made of inflated sheep bladders. Though the river's roar was deafening, the man, a former sailor, remained calm. He relied on his experience to complete this mission, hoping to secure a bright future for his family. When the sacrificial lamb was brought out, it trembled in terror. Dracos beheaded the lamb, anointed the warriors with its blood, and led them in prayer to Achilles. The man dove into the river, his form instantly swallowed by the churning water. Dracos watched the rope anxiously, recalling how I had proposed this risky infiltration of Bycinia. I had provided evidence from the Mathematical Research Institute, where Matacoris calculated the river's flow to prove that a swimmer could reach the opposite bank. Antrapolis reported that while the Bycinian river path had no guards, the city's confidence in the river's impassability left them vulnerable. Seeking to avoid a protracted war, the Dionian commanders ultimately approved my risky plan. The rope reached its limit, pulling taut with immense force. Soldiers struggled to hold the winch steady. Dracos realized the first attempt had failed, but hoped the swimmer might be rescued downstream. The rope remained taut until the soldiers reached their physical limit. Dracos moved to cut the rope, but the winch flew off, narrowly missing him. The winch vanished into the river, leaving the men on the bank in despair. Dracos, the heart of the Second Legion, forced himself to stay composed. He ordered his men to retrieve a new winch and rope. Only 3 such ropes existed, meaning they had only 2 chances left. Dracos gestured for the remaining 2 candidates to step forward. Intimidated by the river's power and the previous failure, both men hesitated and lowered their heads. Dracos was about to lash out when another man stepped forward. It was a recruit from the Navy, known for his speed. Though previously deemed too slight for the task, his courage impressed Dracos. Dracos prepared him, invoking Hades instead of Achilles this time. The sailor, Sicilian, declared his intent to be remembered in the Hall of Heroes before diving in. Dracos watched in agony. Failure here would force a secondary plan, prolonging the war and draining their resources. Suddenly, the winch stopped. Fearing another failure, Dracos shouted for the men to hold the line. As they pulled, Dracos noticed the tension was lighter than before and urged his men on. The tension gradually slackened. Success! Dracos collapsed on the rocks, exhausted but relieved, as his soldiers cheered softly. Dracos waited anxiously until the rope tightened with 3 distinct vibrations, then 3 more. Confirming the signal, he urged his soldiers to secure the rope to a large tree. By dusk, a long rope spanned the Crathis River, connecting both banks. A Second Legion soldier, stripped of heavy armor and carrying only a spear and small shield, crawled across the rope bridge. Suspended 2 meters above the roaring river, he relied on intense training and sheer courage to navigate the swaying line. Upon reaching the far bank, he found Sicilian, who was waiting under a tree, bleeding heavily from his chest. Sicilian had been swept into a reef by the current, suffering severe chest wounds. He clung to the rock until Dracos' team pulled the rope taut, allowing him to crawl to safety. Together, they established a second rope bridge, enabling the 1st Battalion to begin crossing. Crossing was slow. Dracos allowed only 1 soldier per rope to prevent the lines or the anchor trees from failing under excessive weight. Note: Sekelian previously appeared as a patrol captain during the peace negotiations in Thurii. The crossing required immense skill and courage in the dark. Progress was agonizingly slow, and several soldiers slipped and vanished into the river. With a third of the battalion still across by late night, Dracos ordered the remaining men to continue crossing. He instructed Captain Adrianx to lead the first wave in a dawn assault on the riverbank camp to secure the path for the rest of the legion to attack Bycinia. Soldiers rested on the riverbank to recover energy, while others quietly gathered wood to craft makeshift ladders. Adrianx crept near the enemy camp, observing its layout by the dim firelight. His squad leader approached him, whispering that the wounded hero, Sekelian, urgently needed to speak with him. Adrianx, irritable due to recent professional setbacks and the pressure of the mission, initially dismissed the request. He felt humiliated after his failed delegation to the Isthmian Games, which had made him a laughingstock in Greece despite his status as a former mercenary. The Bruttium War offered a chance at redemption, and he was determined to prove himself by leading the 1st Battalion to victory. Relenting, Adrianx went to see Sekelian. A medic was treating Sekelian's broken ribs and lung injury. Sekelian tried to rise, but the medic stopped him. Adrianx softened his tone, asking what the urgency was. Struggling to breathe, Sekelian wheezed. Why wait until dawn to attack the camp? Adrianx replied that it was the legate's order and told him to rest. Sekelian insisted that attacking the camp first would alert the city, making the capture of Bycinia harder. He urged a direct surprise attack on the city instead. Adrianx realized the strategic value. A surprise strike could bypass the camp's defenses. Inspired, Adrianx recalled Daunian military doctrine. Speed, violence of action, and surprise were key to victory, as proven in previous campaigns. He remembered my advice: be bold, yet meticulous. He decided to attack both the camp and the city. Recalling the city's layout, a small town with wooden walls and likely depleted forces, Adrianx calculated that his 1,000 men could easily overwhelm the remaining defenders. He split his force, 300 to the camp, 700 for the city. As the soldiers prepared, the darkness and the river's roar masked their movements. The Bycinia sentries remained asleep, unaware of the impending threat. At the first light of dawn, Adrianx ordered the advance. The order rippled down through the ranks, waking the soldiers. The men rose, shouldered their gear and ladders, and moved out. The advance was silent and disciplined, the soldiers' fatigue replaced by focus. They reached the city's trench undetected. The trench was filled with sharpened stakes, and the wooden wall loomed directly behind it. The soldiers planted their ladders, climbed, and vaulted over the wall, ready to strike. A fur-clad sentry sleeping against the wall was jolted awake by the vibration of ladders hitting the ramparts. Before he could react, over a dozen Dionian soldiers swarmed over, quickly overwhelming the walkway and killing or capturing the guard. The soldiers promptly opened the city gates. Following the prearranged plan, the Centurions led their men into the city, splitting into 3 columns to advance rapidly along the streets. Success! Adrianx signaled with excitement. Sound the horns. As horns and drums erupted, the soldiers let out a deafening roar, plunging the city into chaos. Residents, whether half-naked or hastily armed, were cut down on sight. The bloody slaughter terrified the Bycinia people, forcing them to hide in their homes in silence. Although Bycinia was nestled in the mountains, it sat in a basin and was effectively a flat city. The 1st Battalion advanced quickly toward the center, where the great chieftain's residence and the council hall stood. The commotion roused Kanaru from his sleep. A subordinate burst in, shouting, "Chieftain, the enemy has breached the city." Empty, Kanaru was stunned, his sleepiness vanishing. He wondered if the attackers were the Bruttians, as the Greeks had never entered Bycinia territory. They had even dismantled their western fortress to show goodwill during the Bruttii unification, leaving only a small outpost. Frustrated by his subordinates' ignorance, Kanaru roared, "Get out and find out exactly who they are. Summon chieftains Bajalipi and Brim to the council hall immediately. Sound the horns. Tell everyone to take up arms and follow me to drive out the enemy." Despite Kanaru's decisive orders, the Bycinia people were unprepared for such a disaster. and the residents fell into disarray. Kanara managed to organize a few dozen tribesmen, but they immediately collided with the encroaching enemy. With a roar, Kanara charged, wielding an iron rod that shattered a wooden shield and crushed an enemy soldier with immense force. Adrianx immediately ordered, "Don't fight him head-on. Flank him and target the others." Kanara was shocked to see Greeks, but he had no time to ponder how the Dionians had infiltrated Bycinia. Assuming Adrianx was the commander, Kanara charged directly at him. The experienced Adrianx calmly directed his men to retreat, refusing to engage Kanara directly. Kanara pursued relentlessly, unaware that his own tribesmen were being blocked and separated from him by the Dionian soldiers. Frustrated by the evasion, Kanara only turned back when the screams of his kin alerted him that they were being slaughtered. He was forced to retreat to save them. Adrianx pursued him, keeping him entangled as the other two Dionian columns arrived from different streets. Overwhelmed, Kanara led his survivors back to the residence. Despite being struck by a javelin and suffering a facial wound, he managed to repel the Dionians attempting to storm the gates. Once inside and the gates were barred, Kanara collapsed, leaving his tribesmen in despair. "Captain, Chieftain Brim has been wounded and captured," reported the first-century centurion to Adrianx. Adrianx had divided his 700 men into 3 teams to execute a decapitation strike against the 3 tribal leaders, and the operation was proceeding smoothly. While Brim's residence was near the gate, Adrianx wondered why the other team had also succeeded so quickly. The second centurion replied, "Before we even attacked, that Bycinia chieftain led his people out to surrender." Surprised by the voluntary surrender of Bajalipi, a man of great prestige, Adrianx recalled my instructions and ordered his men to bring him forward. The elderly Bajalipi, calmed by Adrianx's polite demeanor, agreed to persuade the people inside the great chieftain's residence to surrender. Bajalipi was a pragmatist. Having realized the Dionian League was unstoppable, he had decided that resistance was futile. When he heard the attackers were Greeks, he immediately ordered his tribe to lay down their arms, suppressing any internal dissent. His surrender significantly reduced the resistance within the city. Standing before the great chieftain's residence, Bajalipi's call to surrender shocked those watching from the walls. Only Kanara, lying wounded, cursed Bajalipi as a traitor and swore to tear him apart once the Greeks were defeated. Kanara's attempt to rally his men to fight to the death was met only with cold, hesitant stares. Shortly after Bajalipi's plea, the gates opened. Kanara's tribesmen emerged with his corpse, claiming he had died from his wounds. The 300-man team tasked with raiding the camp initially succeeded, as the camp's defenses were oriented toward the river path, leaving the west side vulnerable. However, the Bycinia soldiers were alert and quickly organized a defense. Using 4 towering watchtowers meant for the river path, they rained arrows down on the Dionians, inflicting casualties on the unarmored soldiers. The Bycinia people fought desperately, and despite their numerical advantage, the Dionian soldiers struggled to fully seize the camp. Seeing the city ablaze, the Bycinia warriors lost their will to fight. The Second Legion's main force arrived at the Bycinia fortress to find the battle already over, allowing them to enter the territory unopposed. Legate Dracos, hearing Adrianx was attacking Bycinia city, rushed his exhausted troops forward to reinforce him. Upon arrival, Dracos found Adrianx waiting with a grin, signaling the city had already fallen. "You bold fool, Adrianx. You didn't leave a single fight for us," Dracos exclaimed, half annoyed and half amused. Adrianx, his earlier gloom dispelled by the brilliant victory of capturing both the camp and the city with a single cohort, gestured for them to enter. Dracos waved him off, sternly noting that the Bruttians would surely counterattack or build a blockade to prevent access to the Kazinsa Plateau. He ordered the immediate construction of a defensive fortress to hold the position until I arrived. Adrianx realized his pride had clouded his judgment. He was grateful for Dracos' level-headedness. Adrianx ordered his men to summon Adipagizi, a Bruttian-born Dionian freeman serving as their guide. Dracos commanded the army to bypass the city and march north to begin construction. Though exhausted and grumbling, the soldiers obeyed and marched westward without delay. Bajalipi, the Bycinia representative, watched the disciplined movement with secret admiration. Dracos approached him. Aware that the Dionian League possessed 4 legions, each twice the size of his entire force, and that his people's lives hung in the balance, Bajalipi bowed respectfully to the legate. Dracos helped him up, thanking him for his cooperation in minimizing casualties. He promised to support Bajalipi for a seat in the Senate should Bruttium be integrated into Dionia. Though blunt, Dracos' sincerity moved Bajalipi. While saddened by the loss of Bycinia's independence, Bajalipi was heartened by the prospect of becoming a senator, noting the success of Lacanian leaders in the Senate. Adrianx added his own support. Grateful, Bajalipi resolved to cooperate fully to secure a better future for his people. The Second Legion began building a fortress at the mountain pass exit. Despite the increased labor required by the wider terrain, the soldiers, trained daily in fortification, set to work immediately. Engineers surveyed the land and drafted the plans. Soldiers divided into teams to fell trees, level ground, assemble defenses, and dig trenches filled with traps. Dracos sent a messenger back to the Thurii outpost to report the victory. Through a relay of horses and riders, the news traveled through Castron, Crimissa, Asprostum, and Cilicium, reaching Legate Hieronymus at Terina in just a day and a half. Hieronymus celebrated and immediately dispatched a fast ship from Terina to notify Laos. On the 12th day of the war, I was being hosted by Avenogis. They discussed Avenogis' son, Henipolis, whom Ansitanos had praised for his talent in historical research. Avenogis expressed concern, hoping his only son would eventually succeed him rather than just becoming a historian. I reassured him that a historian could also be an Archon, using his knowledge of history to lead Laos toward prosperity. Delighted, Avenogis toasted me for my mentorship. A guard interrupted to announce that Legate Kapuz had urgent news. Avenogis invited him in, teasing Kapuz for his previous refusals to attend social gatherings. Kapuz entered, shouting that the Second Legion had captured Bycinia city. Avenogis was stunned. I, unsurprised, toasted the victory and ordered my troops to prepare to march for Bycinia, declaring that the real war was about to begin. Kapuz confirmed that Sicida had been notified. I noted that the plans involving Sicida, Hieronymus, and Bagul were now in motion, depending on the enemy's compliance. As Kapuz left, Avenogis remained in shock. I instructed Avenogis to maintain pressure on Vergae to prevent them from reinforcing Bycinia and to assist Sicida's operations. Avenogis pledged his full support, treating my request as a military command. Watching me depart, Avenogis marveled at the man's terrifying efficiency. He was relieved that Laos was an ally of Dionia. Avenogis didn't care how the Second Legion took Bycinia. He only knew the Bruttians were defeated, and southern Italy would soon fall under Daunian control. He felt a pang of sorrow. As Bycinia fell, the few survivors fled toward Cosentia. In Cosentia, High Priest Philoteru was so shocked by the news that he dropped his staff. Word of the Greek victory spread, sparking mass panic. Cosentia immediately dispatched scouts to Bycinia while sending messengers to Clampetia and Vigia. Though the distances to Clampetia and Vigia were similar, the downhill terrain allowed the messenger to reach Clampetia first. At Clampetia, Great Chieftain Panjaru was feasting with Nikulu and Bojamu, celebrating their recent success in repelling a Daunian flanking maneuver. Nikulu mocked the Greeks as cowards, boasting that the Daunian general was a fool for repeatedly attempting the same failed pincer tactics. Bojamu laughed, noting that the Second Legion had retreated after suffering heavy casualties during their initial assault. Panjaru, emboldened by the wine and their perceived success, declared that they could hold their positions for a year against such cowardly enemies. Nikulu slammed his fist on the table, dismissing Sidorum's warnings about Daunian strength as lies, and proposed a counterattack on the enemy camp. Bojamu hesitated, expressing concern over the risks of such an offensive. Nikulu insisted that with 7,000 warriors against a smaller, cowardly force, they could easily crush the Daonians and end the siege. Panjaru was tempted. The presence of these allied troops had caused constant friction and supply issues in Clampetia, and he was eager to resolve the situation. Before he could speak, a guard burst in, knocking over a wine cup. Upon hearing that Bycinia had fallen, a furious Nikulu grabbed the messenger, threatening to cut out his tongue for spreading such impossible lies. The messenger pleaded for his life, producing a letter from the high priest. Panjuru and Bojamu had to physically restrain the enraged Nikulu. Bojamu quickly verified the high priest's seal on the letter. Empty. After reading the letter, Bojamu advised a stunned Nikulu to head to Kosinsha to verify the disaster himself. He handed the letter to Nikulu. Nikulu stared at the papyrus in horror, unable to process the reality of the situation. Panjuru and Bojamu exchanged looks of shock. Their earlier confidence had been shattered in an instant. Suddenly, Nikulu stood up and declared he would return to Bycinia to reclaim his city and save his people. Panjuru urged caution, suggesting they wait for confirmation and coordinate with Pianluan before acting. Nikulu retorted that Panjuru only felt calm because his city was safe, then stormed out of the residence. Bojamu agreed that waiting was no longer an option. He announced he would lead his Ambanian warriors to Kosinsha to join Pianluan and plan their next move. Panjuru asked in panic what would happen to the enemy forces currently at their gates. Bojamu realized they had been deceived. The forces here were merely a diversion for the real Daunian offensive at Bycinia. As Bojamu departed, Panjuru cursed the cowardly Greeks and his allies alike. Meanwhile, in Vigia, Pianluan, Petaru, and Sidorums were discussing a troop withdrawal. Sidorums had suggested that since the Daonians' offensive had stalled, most of the Kosintian troops should return home to serve as a reserve and ease supply burdens. Pianluan agreed, hoping that reducing the number of Kosintian troops in Vigia would minimize the ongoing friction between the two groups. They decided that Pianluan would lead 8,000 men back to Kosinsha, while Petaru would remain with 2,000 to assist the Vigians. Pianluan had groomed his son-in-law, Petaru, to lead the alliance, hoping to merge the tribes into a unified, powerful force. Petaru accepted the order, viewing the stay in Vigia as an opportunity to strengthen ties with the local leadership. The leaders were in high spirits, believing the war was turning in their favor, until the messenger arrived. The news of Bycinia's fall stunned everyone in the hall. Even the usually composed Pianluan struggled to accept the truth until he read the high priest's letter. Sidorums bitterly concluded that they had been tricked. The attacks on Vigia and Clampetia were merely diversions for the strike on Bycinia. Regaining his composure, Pianluan rallied his allies, arguing that since the Daunian main force was tied down elsewhere, they must immediately mobilize to retake Bycinia before the enemy could consolidate. Sidorums insisted, even if we can't retake Bycinia, we must at least blockade the road to the Kazinsa Plateau. Sensing Sidorum's pessimism, Pianluan didn't argue. He told Petaru, I'll ride to Kazinsa to urge the new tribes to provide more warriors and order Nikulu and Bojamu to rendezvous there. You take the 10,000 Kazinsa warriors and march back immediately. Understood, great chieftain, Petaru replied, feeling reassured. Elder Sidorums, I'm sorry, but you'll have to hold this alone, Pianluan said, sticking to the alliance's new titles. Don't worry, Sidorums replied confidently. If Bycinia isn't the main target, I can hold it. But I wonder how great Chieftain Nikulu will react to this news. Realizing the urgency, Pianluan replied, You're right, I must leave at once. Pianluan and Petaru departed, leaving Sidorums lost in thought. Suru asked, Great Chieftain, do you think we can retake Bycinia? Sidorums sighed, Who knows? The Daunian Archon has been playing us like puppets. He surely has a plan for after he took Bycinia. Suru stammered, You mean, we might lose? Sidorums sighed again. Only Umla and Brutus know the answer to that. As war broke out, Thurii grew quiet as most citizens left for battle, leaving only the Temple of Hades crowded. Thanks to the efforts of High Priest Plyzinus, the people of Thurii and Amendalara had come to deeply trust the grim deity. Crowds knelt on the hillsides, praying for the Daunian army's victory and the safe return of their loved ones. Plyzinus and his priests provided comfort, water, shelter, and medical aid to the petitioners. To ensure security, the Senate restricted city access to citizens only. While the city was quiet, the ports and markets buzzed. Supplies, grain, salted fish, meat, and weapons were dispatched under Mercis's coordination, some to the western camp, most to Laos, and the rest by sea to Cilicium and Tyrrhena. Empty. The Kristoya restaurant remained packed with reserved citizens, freemen, and merchants gossiping about everything from my divine conception to the bedroom habits of patrol Captain Oliverus and his Persian wife. The Brution War dominated conversations. While locals believed in Dionian victory, foreign merchants were skeptical due to the lack of progress, often leading to brawls that kept the patrol busy. Dicaeopolis and Theos sat in a corner, eating lamb and drinking beer while listening to the chatter. Dicaeopolis sighed. The downside of the Dionian League is the constant war. It's affected my business. Theos comforted him. War is everywhere. Even Corinth fears conflict with Sparta. At least Ionia has never lost a battle. You run a weapon workshop, so you love war. I heard the Archon visited you. Dicaeopolis said enviously. Theos leaned in, whispering, Dionia is upgrading its gear. Their citizen army is too large for their own shops to equip, so they've tapped my workshop as their sole large-scale supplier. That's thousands of sets. You'll be rich. Theos shook his head. I am shrewd. I want to trade old gear for new, paying only for the labor. Old gear? You mean rusted? No. They're ditching traditional Greek gear for leather-reinforced iron helmets with jaw guards and large, curved oxhide shields. It's a strange design. He's a famous general. Trust his design. You can resell the old Greek gear to other cities, Dicaeopolis suggested. Between shipping, taxes, and time, it's a hassle. But I said something that keeps me up at night. What did he say? It's a pity you aren't a Dionian citizen. Otherwise, we could collaborate further. Dicaeopolis's eyes lit up. He wants you to become a citizen. I think so too, Theos sighed. But the law requires me to renounce my Corinthian citizenship, and the process is long. Does Corinth give you land? No. Then what's the point? Can Corinth beat Sparta? No. Then stop hesitating. Become a citizen, get your own land, and grow your business. Fortune is smiling on you. Theos was struck by this realization. My friend, you're right. I've made up my mind. Dicaeopolis smiled. I want to become a citizen too. Life here is vibrant. The sports, the food, the doctors, the stability. Dionia is a rising power, and I'd rather be part of it than return to the barren, dull life in Crete. Theos raised his glass. Shall we go register with the census officer together? Dicaeopolis laughed. Let's go together. They drank, shedding their worries and chatting happily. Nearby, a dispute broke out over the Isthmian Games. Dicaeopolis teased. Theos, be careful not to mention you're a Corinthian here. Theos cursed the Corinthian council. Those idiots underestimate Dionia, not realizing this rising alliance is far stronger than Corinth. Offending them is foolish. Dicaeopolis agreed. Many Greeks view Western Mediterranean cities as backwater colonies. They don't realize Dionia rivals Sparta and Athens, and cities like Tarentum and Croton are among Greece's finest. Offending a growing Dionia will bring Corinth trouble, Theos worried. Why worry? You've decided to become a Dionian citizen. But I have family in Corinth. Suddenly, a deafening cheer erupted in the market. A patrolman entered the restaurant, shouting, Rejoice, Dionians! Under me, our brave soldiers have captured the Brutii city of Bycinia. Wonderful! Another victory. Bycinia near Thurii? It's notoriously treacherous. We captured it in just days. The restaurant erupted in cheers. Onward, brave soldiers. Take Cosentia next. The waiter announced. To celebrate, my master is offering free food and drink today. Victory! Long live Lady Calixituoia, the guests cheered. The patrolman asked for a beer. Raising his mug, he toasted. To our omnipotent leader and our heroic citizen soldiers. Everyone toasted. A neighbor congratulated Dicaeopolis and Theos on their decision to become citizens. Dicaeopolis was surprised. You heard us? The man winked. Why else would I insult the Corinthians? Theos smiled. This news is a sign from the goddess of fate. Agreed, Dicaeopolis nodded. Cheers. The restaurant drank to the victory. The patrolman added, the Senate is calling for 2,000 freemen with military training to assist at Bycinia. Register at Victory Square. Only 2,000. They'll be gone in minutes. The restaurant emptied as people rushed out. Dicaeopolis and Theos stared at each other. Victory Square was already packed. The census department verified identities. The courts checked for criminal records, and military officers selected the fittest, youngest, and most diligent candidates. Successful applicants were logged to accelerate their path to reserve citizen status. Hundreds of officials processed the crowd, with thousands of reserve soldiers maintaining order. Over 10,000 freemen gathered. They remained orderly, knowing other opportunities existed, like temple construction or road building, which also helped earn citizenship, albeit with less pay. Law-abiding behavior was essential. Any disruption risked expulsion. Disputed selections could be appealed to the Ministry of Supervision. Outside the Senate House, Felicius argued, "We should send the reserve force to Bycinia. They are better trained and more disciplined than these freemen." Maligi countered, "If you send the citizen soldiers, who protects Thurii from raids or riots?" Felicius hesitated. "We are surrounded by allies. If we can take Bycinia, others can take Thurii," Maligi retorted, thinking Felicius was politically naive. "With me away, a local garrison was vital to prevent internal unrest." Mercis agreed with Maligi. "The reserve force?" Mercis exclaimed, "Do you know how much grain costs? We've emptied the treasury and gone into debt to supply for legions for 4 months. Freemen are much cheaper to feed than soldiers. Use your head, Felicius. An army marches on its stomach." Felicius accepted the rebuke. Behind them, Antorus remained stunned by the news. Eurycpus asked, "How did the Archon take Bycinia so quickly when it's so well fortified?" Antorus replied, "I don't know the details, but he is God favored by Hades. Perhaps no obstacle can stop him." Pleiades suggested, "Let's apply to join the legions." Eurycpus sighed, "I checked. The system is strict. Even as senators, we'd have to start in the training camp like common freemen. It's insulting." Pleiades shrugged, "So we train. Are we really worse than the freemen?" Antorus reflected on the debate, realizing that not only had he accepted his status as a Dionian citizen, but so had Pleiades and Eurycpus. Once a chief general of Crimissa, he had struggled against minor Brution raids. Now, as a senator, he could decide the fate of an entire race. It was true. The higher one stood, the broader the view, and one could never return to the coarse bread of the past. On the other side of the platform, Cunegurata and Cornelius discussed a different matter. "With Bycinia occupied, our conquest of the Brutii seems imminent," Cornelius remarked, marveling at Dionia's rapid rise. Cunegurata looked further ahead. "Defeating the Brutii is one thing, but how to govern them is a major problem." Cornelius guessed, "We will likely govern them as we did the Lacanians." Cunegurata hesitated, noting the Brutii were different from the Lacanians. He stopped himself, realizing it was too early to predict the war's outcome or the final treaties. Regardless, if Brutium were conquered, Thurii would finally be secure. Meanwhile, on the island of Motia, the war dragged on. The Motians fought as a whole, refusing to yield despite heavy casualties. The Syracusans made slow, costly progress but failed to capture the entire city. Dionysius grew increasingly irritable, executing 2 of his own guards for trivial reasons. Realizing a direct assault was failing, he accepted a plan from the former mercenary leader Marges to infiltrate the city under the cover of darkness. The gamble succeeded. The strike team opened the gates, allowing the main Syracusan force to flood in and crush the resistance after a fierce battle. Seeking revenge for fallen comrades and remembering the atrocities committed by the Carthaginian general Hannibal of the Maganid family at Himera a decade prior, the Greek soldiers ignored the loot and began a brutal massacre. After a day of slaughter, Dionysius halted the killing, not out of mercy, but because captives were more profitable. The victors turned to looting, stripping the city bare and selling the survivors into slavery. Leaving garrisons to hold the corpse-filled city and continue the siege of Segesta, Dionysius led his army back to Syracuse. With winter approaching, he planned to resolve the remaining Carthaginian strongholds like Eryx, Solus, and Panormus in the spring. The fall of Motia was a historic triumph for the Greeks, but a devastating blow to Carthage, leaving their African territories exposed to Greek influence. Empty. In the Carthaginian Senate, the Maganid-led war faction attacked the conservative Hanno, successfully pushing through a motion to attack Syracuse and restore their northern security buffer. The Senate appointed Hamilco, a Suffete and head of the Maganid family, as commander. They began recalling troops from Iberia, led by Hamilco's brother Mago, and initiated supply preparations. A crisis struck Grimentum when the Lude and Brina tribes clashed. When city magistrate Bagul attempted to mediate, he was ambushed and barely escaped back to the city. Grimentum went into lockdown, though no counterattack was launched against the rebels. Panic spread through the surrounding tribes, and the news reached Pixis and Potentia. "Son, Pomote has finally made his move. We must attack Grimentum immediately." Sensing urged, both excited and anxious. Geninate asked, "Father, didn't you say we should wait for Potentia to act first?" "The situation has changed. Bagul's ambush proves Pomote is inciting the tribes. The Dionians haven't retaliated, which means they lack the troops. They are all tied up in Brutium." Sensing gloated, citing reports that Dionian forces were stalled at Vergae and Clampetia. He argued that they must seize Grimentum before Pomote could, ensuring the Pixis faction controlled the region. Geninate left to rally the warriors, while Sensing prayed to the god Asinu, vowing to sacrifice Greeks to avenge his lost influence. In Potentia, Polit urged his brother, the great chieftain Pomote, to strike Grimentum before Sensing seized it. Pomote remained unmoved, calmly repeating, "Wait." When Polit threatened to lead a force himself, Pomote silenced him, asserting his authority as the leader of Potentia. Polit obeyed, as Pomote had raised him like a father. "Polit," Pomote said, "remember how we lost Grimentum." Polit remained silent but resentful. Pomote explained his caution. Unlike the others, Potentia faced the threat of the Samnites to the north. If their strength waned, those hungry wolves would destroy them. Polit wavered. Pomote revealed that the Samnites had previously offered to lend troops to fight the Dionians, a trap he had wisely avoided. Polit was stunned. Pomote concluded that the situation was too volatile to gamble on. Let Sensing fight the Dionians. They were not easy foes to defeat. Polit asked why they had allied with the Brutii then. Pomote replied that the alliance was merely an insurance policy, urging patience until a true opportunity arose. Pienluin rode to Cosentia and persuaded Niculae to delay his attack on Bycinia until their main force was assembled. Soon, scouts reported that the Greeks were building a fortress on the road to the highlands. Fearing the fortification would make retaking Bycinia impossible, Pienluin ordered Niculae to harass the builders, cautioning him against a direct assault. Niculae arrived to find the Greeks had already erected a 3-meter-high wooden wall with gates, trenches, and caltrops. Legate Dracos had utilized the time well, dividing his 7,000 men into 3 shifts to work around the clock, supported by the engineering battalion. As the Brutii approached, the Greek horn sounded, and the workers retreated behind the walls. Niculae was furious at the speed of the construction and the Greeks' audacity. He ordered his warriors to attack, and they charged like wolves toward the lightly armed Greeks. The Dionians retreated in perfect order, watching their attackers with amusement. 50 meters from the wall, the Brutii charge collapsed as they hit hidden pits, wooden stakes, and meat hooks, suffering gruesome injuries. The Vergae had suffered this before, but Sidorums had failed to warn the others. Traps ahead. As the Brutii stalled, Dracos ordered his archers to prepare. Bagilipi, the Bycinian leader, begged Dracos to let him attempt a peaceful surrender first. Dracos had brought Bagilipi along to familiarize him with the terrain and keep him away from the city to prevent unrest. Dracos nodded in agreement. Bagilipi shouted to his people, promising that their families were safe and that the Dionians would welcome them as citizens if they returned home. The Brutii warriors clearly heard his familiar voice. The cries of the wounded faded as the soldiers listened, whispering among themselves. Niculae raged, cursing Bagilipi as a traitor and vowing to flay him alive. Realizing his men were in no state to fight, Niculae ordered a retreat. Some warriors lingered, refusing to leave. Niculae had to use other tribesmen to force them back, nearly causing a skirmish. He withdrew several miles, his troops demoralized. Dracos held his position, following Bagilipi's advice. Niculae tried to rally his men, claiming the Greeks had enslaved their families, but his efforts were interrupted by the arrival of Bycinian women. Bagilipi had gathered the wives of the soldiers, instructing them to bring their husbands home. The women reached the camp, and the guards allowed them to enter. Emotional reunions followed, with the women confirming that the Dionians had restored order, treated the wounded, and protected their homes. Some soldiers wept upon learning their families had survived the battle. The camp was in chaos, a mix of relief and confusion that terrified Nikilu. Desperate, Nikilu ordered his guard to isolate the women from the soldiers. My attempt to prevent escalation backfired. My guard's brutal treatment of the Bycinia women sparked a riot. The Bycinia warriors, enraged by the sight of their kin being dragged away, surrounded the Nikilu tribe guards. The arrogant guards, fearing for their lives, begged for mercy. The Bycinia warriors ignored them, beating them until several died. Realizing the gravity of their actions, the warriors hesitated, terrified of Nikulu's long-standing tyranny. A young Bycinia warrior shouted, "We've killed Nikula's kin. He won't spare us. Let's seize him now and go home." His call gave the confused warriors a clear objective. They rallied and charged toward Nikulu's tent. Nikulu, having received word of the chaos, fled on horseback to seek aid from other tribal leaders, but they refused to intervene. With only 1,000 men against 2,000 enraged Bycinia, and lacking authority over the other tribes, the isolated Nikulu found no support. As the Bycinia warriors approached, Nikulu fled the camp again. Seeing the other tribes standing ready, the Bycinia warriors, fearing retaliation, chose to retreat. The young warrior urged them to follow Bajalipi's advice and return to Bycinia, which was now their only viable option. Outside the new Dionian fortress, Bajalipi and several elders welcomed the returning warriors. Dracos was both excited and troubled by the success of Bajalipi's plan. Integrating 2,000 returning warriors was a challenge, but the bloodless victory bought him crucial time, and he eagerly awaited my arrival. Sinsing and his son Geninate led 6,000 Pixis warriors toward Grimentum. As expected, northern tribes, including those who had ambushed Baguil, surrendered upon their arrival. Learning from past mistakes, Sinsing treated the surrendering tribes warmly, swelling his ranks to over 10,000 as he marched south. In Grimentum, Baguil, feigning injury, lamented that the northern tribes had defected to Sinsing so quickly, rendering his deceptive rumors useless. Assist sneered, noting that the crisis had exposed the disloyal tribes. He argued that this was the perfect opportunity to purge the traitors and fully integrate Grimentum into their territory. Baguil sighed, reluctant to see so many Lacanians purged. Assist countered that the Lacanians had long suffered from internal strife, and unification under Dionia would finally bring them peace and prosperity. Empty, convinced, Baguil declared his commitment to seizing this chance to unify Lucania as a Dionian citizen. Assists asked if they should reinforce Kexima's tribe, given Sinsing's rapid growth. Baguil decided to remain passive to keep Sinsing overconfident. He prepared for the coming battle, waiting for Legate Hieronymus and Lazuru to arrive, hoping for a decisive victory to restore Lazuru's honor. Assists, acting as Baguil's meticulous assistant, questioned if the lack of movement from Potentius signaled a hidden threat. Baguil dismissed the concern, confident that the cautious Plomote would not act until it was too late. Nikulu fled back to Cosentia, where Pienluin was shocked to learn of the Dionian fortress and the loss of the Bycinia soldiers, regretting his impulsive decision to send them. Nikulu promised that his presence on the battlefield would demoralize the Bycinia rebels. Pienluin remained skeptical, blaming Nikulu's poor leadership for the rebellion. Pienluin ordered other tribes to send reinforcements while awaiting Petaru's army. By dusk, with Petaru and the Ambania chieftain Bojemu arrived, Pienluin felt more secure. The next morning, a force of nearly 20,000, including 2,000 slaves, marched east. At Napisha, Panjaru remained calm despite reports of an impending attack, believing the Dionians would not prioritize his city. He reassured his men, confident in the strength of Napisha's walls. A soldier reported that the Dionians were digging, which puzzled Panjaru. Upon reaching the walls, Panjaru saw the 4th Legion had leveled a 20-meter slope 100 meters away. The Brutii warriors watched in confusion as the Dionians placed wooden frames on the slope, some mistaking them for religious tools. Panjaru's anxiety grew as he watched the enemy move wooden crates toward the frames. Silas asked the ballista unit captain if they were ready to fire. The The captain replied that they needed the rangefinder to calibrate. A student from the Mathematical Research Institute, serving as the rangefinder, confirmed they were ready but requested a test shot. He explained that due to the elevation difference between the ballistae and the city walls, a test shot was necessary to ensure accuracy. The captain nodded, though Silas remained bewildered. He knew he lacked my intellectual prowess, but he trusted the specialist I had personally selected from the Mathematical Research Institute. Set the elevation rod to the middle and pull the bowstring to the maximum, the specialist ordered. The captain relayed the command to the ballista crews. The crews cranked the pulleys, drawing the thick bowstring back. The torsion springs groaned, and the wooden arms bent under the immense tension until the string locked into the guide's final notch. Ballistae ready. Following the order, the crews loaded a fist-sized stone sphere, a smooth, hardened Davos cement projectile, into the woven net. Fire. The crews released the triggers. The twisted ox tendon springs snapped, launching the stone along the guide and through the main beam's aperture. With a sharp whoosh, the stone vanished into the sky, becoming a mere speck. To Panjaru, the speck grew rapidly. Amidst the warriors' cries, it cleared the wall and smashed through a rooftop inside the city. The warriors panicked, debating the nature of the weapon. Panjaru's face darkened. This was clearly a new Dionian siege weapon. He wondered if the timing, deploying it only after Nikulu and Bojaimu departed, was a calculated trap. Elevation too high, range about 300 meters, the specialist noted, consulting his parabolic trajectory charts. Lower the rod one notch, keep max tension, and fire again. As the crews reloaded, the specialist advised Silas. Our research shows the upper middle section of the wall is weakest. We must concentrate our fire there. Silas nodded, absorbing the instruction. The next stone struck the wall with a thunderous crash, sending debris flying as the enemy's cries echoed across the distance. Satisfied, the specialist ordered, "All ballistae, fire with these settings." A dozen stones followed, blooming like stone flowers against the enemy ramparts. "Keep firing." Silas, pleased with the results but cautious, ordered his men to begin constructing the siege causeway. A messenger departed. Silas turned to Cypros. "Lord Cypros, I hope your men will assist in the siege." "Consider it done, Legate," Cypros replied, awestruck by the roaring stones. He realized the era of hiding behind city walls was ending. Dionia's new weapons and siege towers rendered traditional defenses obsolete. In the Bycinia Council Hall, Legate Dracos presided over a meeting with his captains, Bajalipi, the defecting Brim, and Kreru, the young leader who had ousted Nikulu. "Empty. Kazinsa's army has reached the Brutii camp," Dracos announced. "Reports suggest over 20,000 men." He felt relieved, not anxious. To manage the 2,000 newly surrendered Bycinian warriors, Bajalipi had suggested keeping them in the new fortress to defend against Nikulu's expected retaliation, allowing each tribe to be led by its own chief to ease tensions. Dracos appreciated the gesture, though he knew deep-seated grudges between the Dionians and Bycinian families remained. He hoped to channel this friction into the defense against the common enemy. Adipagese translated the briefing into the Brutii language, sparking excitement among the captains. Kreru, though nervous, knew he had to hold the line. If the city fell, Nikulu would surely execute him first. Bajalipi remained calm, sharing Kreru's grim assessment. Brim, clutching his bandaged stomach, exclaimed in shock, 20,000 Kazinsa warriors? Do they even have that many? Pienluan likely gathered the Pandosians and other tribes, Bajalipi explained. Brim sighed, 20,000. That is an unprecedented force for the Brutii. Nonsense. Trotilus stood up. We've defeated larger armies at Croton and against the Messapi and Pcdi. We fear not the number of enemies, but their scarcity. The other captains cheered. Bajalipi restrained Brim as he tried to argue. Adrianx stepped in to mediate. Though the enemy is vast, we have thousands of soldiers and a fortress. As Lord Diffusi says, without a massive numerical advantage, siege is difficult. Besides, Lord Diffusi's main army is coming. The mention of me silenced Brim's objections. Dracos turned to the next order of business. Zipite, how are the 2,000 new Dionian freemen training? They were well selected, Zipite reported. They follow orders, excel at archery and javelins, and can hold their own in melee. They are ready for the defense. Good, Dracos said sternly. The wall walkways are narrow. When the enemy attacks, lead the light infantry and the freemen in constant ranged fire. When the enemy reaches the base, pull back and let the archers disrupt their rhythm. Rest assured, Legate, Zipite declared confidently. Hades will protect us. The enemy will be repelled before you even need to draw your swords. Dracos, satisfied with his men's morale, offered no praise or levity, merely nodding. He addressed the captains. Once Zipite's troops retreat to the walls, the first and second cohorts and the Bycinia warriors will man the defenses. First and second will hold the southern wooden wall, while the Bycinia warriors secure the north. Leave no gaps. The third and fourth cohorts will serve as reserves, ready to reinforce any breach. The fifth and sixth cohorts will remain stationed within Bycinia city. Do you all understand your orders? Understood. Young Krem shouted, representing the Bycinia warriors, including Bajalipi and the Silent Brim. By Brutus, no Cosentian shall scale our walls. Legate, this is unfair. We want to fight at the fortress too. Sixth cohort captain Trotilus protested loudly. The fifth cohort captain remained silent, but looked equally dejected. Dracos replied sternly, "That is an order." As Trotilus prepared to argue, Adrianx interrupted. "Trotilus, Bycinia city is vital. If the fortress falls, your city is the final line of defense and the staging ground for Lord Diffusi's main army." Adrianx's blunt warning hit home. Without Dionian soldiers in the city, any uprising would cut off the Third Legion's retreat, endangering the entire campaign and ruining Lord Diffusi's strategy. "I accept the order," Trotilus conceded. A distant, mournful sound of Brutii horns echoed across the field. Zipite peered over the ramparts. A black tide of Brutii warriors surged across the grass. Unlike the disorganized Lacanians, they moved in tight formation. Stopping 200 meters out, Pienluin ordered, "Drive the slaves forward. Fill those traps." 2,000 slaves, mostly Greeks captured from Magna Graecia, were forced forward at spear point, carrying sacks of earth. A soldier whispered to Zipite, "Captain, they've reached the trap zone." Zipite smiled calmly. "New recruit. Patience. Let them get closer." The slaves moved in chaotic terror, dropping sacks and stumbling into traps. Their screams only fueled the panic, forcing them to dump their loads faster. Brutii overseers whipped or speared any slave who faltered. Driven by the threat of death, the slaves retreated to the rear to reload, then returned to the front. "Archers ready," Zipite signaled, raising his arm. Over 500 7th Battalion archers and 2,000 freemen stood atop the 4-meter wall, bows drawn. At 80 meters, they were in range. Zipite whispered a prayer to Hades and slashed his hand down. Fire! A volley of 2,000 arrows rained down, cutting through the slave ranks. Pienluin watched, stunned not by the slave losses, but by the sheer number and skill of the Dionian archers. He realized this was no ragtag force, but a main army. Previous reports had drastically underestimated the enemy's numbers and the sophistication of their fortress. "Great chieftain, they have many archers," Petaru noted with concern. Pienluin remained cold. "Let the Greek slaves exhaust their arrows. I don't care if they all die." After executing several fleeing slaves, the Brutii forced the rest back into the kill zone under a relentless hail of arrows. As they closed to 60 meters, the casualties mounted, turning the field into a carpet of bodies. Terrified, several slaves broke ranks, sprinting forward despite the stakes and hooks tearing their flesh. "I am Greek," they screamed, but the slaughter continued. The soldiers on the wall looked at Zipite with pleading eyes. Zipite hesitated. Suddenly, Brutii warriors charged out, using the sacks as stepping stones to throw javelins at the trapped slaves. The sight of the brutal execution hardened Zipite's resolve. "Keep firing," he roared. A final, furious volley swept away the remaining slaves and the advancing Brutii. 2,000 slaves lay dead in the trap zone, failing even to reach the trench. The Brutii leaders were visibly shaken. "Great chieftain Pienluin, look!" Bojayamu gestured toward the carnage. "Send the warriors," Pienluin commanded coldly. "We are too close to turn back now." Thousands of Brutii warriors advanced in loose formation, shields raised and sacks in hand. Zipite prayed for time to let his men rest their aching arms. Fire, he ordered again. The Brutii warriors, more experienced than the slaves, crouched behind shields. However, as they hit the obstacles 30 meters out, the Dionian javelin throwers joined the archers, inflicting heavy casualties and forcing a retreat. Great chieftain, Petaru urged. Attack again. Pianluan ordered. Petaru, take 4,000 to the north wall. Bojayamu, hit the south. Nikulu, take the center. Clear the obstacles and fill the trench first. The Dionians cheered the retreat, but the enemy soon returned, moving in tight groups protected by massive door-sized shields. In the center, Brutii warriors pushed a cart piled high with earth toward the main gate, the only path free of traps. Zipite, experienced in battle, ordered his men to hold their fire until the enemy exposed themselves from behind their shields. The central cart became the focus of the Dionian light infantry. Despite heavy losses, Nikulu's roar drove his men forward until they finally reached the trench, ready to dump their load. Zipite ordered the slingers to hurl oil jars collected from Bycinia at the wooden carts before the trench. The jars shattered, drenching the carts in oil. Fire arrows, Zipite commanded, firing the first shot himself. The carts ignited instantly, engulfing the nearby Brutii warriors in flames, sending them rolling in panic. Seeing the crisis, Nikulu discarded his shield, pushed past hesitant soldiers, and shoved the burning cart toward the trench with all his might. Inspired by his courage, Brutii warriors followed, braving a hail of arrows and javelins to push the flaming carts. With a crash, the carts toppled into the 3-meter-deep trench. The sacks inside filled it halfway, covering the spikes and allowing the warriors to cross easily. Nikulu fell, struck by 2 javelins. Pianluan felt a chill at the loss, while his Brutii warriors surged forward to fill the trench with more sacks. Pianluan ordered a full assault. 10,000 soldiers, split into 2 waves, advanced with ladders and battering rams. As the Brutii horns sounded, the Dionian army responded, and the first and second cohorts moved to the walls. Brutii warriors reached the trench, but the 3rd Legion's javelins decimated them. Those who reached the wall found it impossible to scale due to outward slanting spikes installed by the Dionians. A Brutii warrior was struck in the head by a falling stone. Kreru cheered the Bycinian soldier, urging his men to slaughter the Cosentians. The battle intensified as Dionian and Bycinian defenders used every weapon available to repel the assault. The Brutii used battering rams against the gates and walls, believing the hastily built Dionian fortifications were weak. They were right. The walls were double-layered wooden fences filled with loose, uncompacted earth, lacking proper reinforcement. Dracos, noticing the enemy's focus, diverted troops to intercept these suicide squads. Pianluan had more than just these 2 tactics. Adrianx was alerted to flames at the base of the wall, where Brutii warriors were pouring oil. Adrianx ordered his men to throw javelins and dump sand to extinguish the fire. Because the wall lacked fireproofing, Dracos had wisely placed sandbags along the walkway for emergencies. The fire was doused, but Adrianx remained vigilant, ordering his officers to watch for any enemy carrying oil. The siege was brutal. Watching his men fall, Pianluan grew anxious and moved closer to the front, reaching the edge of the trap zone. His horse, unsettled by the corpses, pawed nervously at the mud. Pianluan was stunned by the Dionians' effective 3-day fortification and the soldiers' defensive skill. As his confidence waned, the southern section of the wall, defended by less disciplined Bycinian troops, began to buckle under the Brutii assault. Empty, support from watchtowers and Zipite's light infantry kept the southern wall from falling completely. Zipite shot an enemy through his thick leather armor, killing him instantly. Reaching for more arrows, Zipite found his quiver empty. He ordered his guard to fetch more. The guard returned with 10 arrows, warning that the quartermaster was rationing supplies. "How are we out already?" Zipite complained. The guard explained that 2,000 archers had already exhausted their initial supply, and the quartermaster was strictly rationing the remaining 30,000 arrows provided by Mercis. Frustrated by the stingy quartermaster, Zipite rallied his men. "We have our falcons and spears. We don't need arrows to win." "Agreed," the men shouted. Pianluan hesitated to commit his final 5,000 reserves, as the area beneath the wall was already too congested. Suddenly, a thunderous roar erupted, followed by cheers. The wall had collapsed. Pretty-eye warriors surged through the breach. Brim, the eldest Bycinian leader, desperately tried to stabilize his panicking men. Brim shouted orders, knowing the collapse was caused by fire and rams weakening the uncompacted earth. He urged his men to hold their ground, pointing to the disciplined Dionian reserves already forming a phalanx behind the breach. The third and fourth cohorts welcomed the breach, eager to join the fray. The Brutii found themselves trapped against a wall of bronze shields and spears. The Dionians, moving in perfect rhythm, slaughtered them while archers and javelin throwers rained death from above. Casualties spiked. The Brutii tried to retreat, but were crushed against the wave of their own reinforcements still pushing forward. The Second Legion's third and fourth cohorts tightened their encirclement, crushing the Brutii warriors into a dense mass where they struggled even to swing their weapons. Pianluan initially felt hope as Brutii warriors surged toward the breach, but their momentum stalled. When he saw them suddenly break and flee, followed by heavily armored Dionian soldiers pouring out to flank the remaining attackers, his heart sank. He realized the force occupying Bycinia was not a mere detachment, but the formidable legion the Dionians had claimed. "Retreat," he cried out in agony. While regrouping his shattered forces, he received even worse news. "What? A riot in Cosentia?" "Yes, great chieftain. A dozen tribes attacked the inner city the day after you left. Only Katorki's timely intervention saved it. They now hold the western outer city. The high priest urges you to return and restore order." Pianluan ordered the messenger back, telling the high priest to hold the inner city with Katorki. The forced relocation of these restless tribes to the outer city had backfired. The Dionian invasion was emboldening the dissatisfied tribes, and Pianluan knew he had to act quickly to prevent total collapse. He ordered Petaru to break camp. Bojemu burst into the tent, demanding, "Are we really abandoning the siege and letting the Dionians build their fortress?" Pianluan replied calmly, "What else can we do? We lost nearly 2,000 men today, half of your Ambalian force. Facing 6,000 trained Dionians and 2,000 Bycinian traders behind those walls, we cannot take this fortress." Bojemu sat down, defeated, murmuring, "Must we watch the Dionians march into our homeland? Let them come." Pianluan roared, embracing Bojemu. "We will rally every Brutii warrior and make our stand on the Kazensa Plateau. This battle will decide our fate. Goddess Umla will protect us." Reinvigorated by the mention of Umla and the plateau, Bojemu's fighting spirit returned. Sensing, having secured the support of northern tribes, marched south toward Gramentum, only to face unexpected resistance. Tribes that had migrated from Nerulum, now loyal to Dionia, rejected Sensing's envoys and united to oppose Pixis. Sensing prepared to attack, but news arrived that 2,000 Dionian soldiers had sortied from Gramentum. Fearing a flank attack while engaging the Lacanian tribes, Sensing was forced to withdraw. As soon as the Pixis forces retreated, the Dionians pulled back into the city. After 2 days of this, Sensing concluded the Dionians were merely posturing and lacked the courage to attack. He left Genate to watch Gramentum while he marched south to subdue the other tribes. Then, a messenger from Pixis arrived. 1,000 Elenes were raiding their territory, burning fields and settlements. With limited forces, Pixis demanded Sensing's immediate return. Sensing was furious. He seethed at the audacity of the Elenes, a weak Greek state once crushed by Pixis, now emboldened by the Dionio alliance. Though he dreamed of destroying Elia, he had to prioritize Pixis. The raids threatened his political standing, as his support among the elders and priests was already fragile following his defeat at Gramentum. He halted his campaign and sent Genate with 3,000 men to annihilate the Elian invaders. To sustain his army, he ordered the plundering of neutral tribes, forcing them to either flee or join the Dionian side. At Clampetia, the 4th Legion's ballistae battered the walls for hours, shattering the defenders' morale. Great Chieftain Panjaru decided to launch a night raid to destroy the machines. However, the Dionian commander, Silas, had anticipated this, leaving the ballistae behind a protective earthwork to lure them out. The Clampetia raiding party was ambushed by the 4th Legion and nearly annihilated. After losing hundreds of men, Panduru dared not strike again. The next day, under cover of ballistae and peltasts, Dionian soldiers and Terina civilians built 3 causeways toward the moat. The Clampetia warriors watched in horror as 3 wooden siege towers were pushed forward. These 5-meter-tall towers, covered in wet cowhide, featured drawbridges at the top to allow soldiers to storm the walls directly. While simpler than those of Syracuse, these towers were ingeniously designed with protective wooden sheds to shield the laborers pushing them from enemy arrows. The Brutii, having never seen such massive siege engines, were paralyzed. Their arrows and javelins bounced off the towers, and they lacked the heavy artillery to destroy them. Armored archers climbed the towers and began raining fire upon the defenders. Despite being outnumbered, the Dionian archers held the high ground and the advantage. Meanwhile, Dionian soldiers filled the moat to bring the towers closer to the walls. A desperate Panduru ordered his men to hold at all costs while sending a rider to Cosentia for help, knowing that without reinforcements, Clampetia would fall within days. At dawn, Legate Dracos and Captain Adrianx led officers outside Bycinia to welcome me, the Archon and Supreme Commander of Dionia. Among the welcoming party were Bycinia's leaders Bajalipi and Brim, the newly emerged Kreru, and various nobles, all waiting with a mix of nerves and excitement for the Dionian leader. To ensure security, Dracos ordered the 5th and 6th cohorts to maintain a strict defensive perimeter within the city. Is Davos really younger than us? Rotem, Bajalipi's nephew, asked Kreru. The two had become fast friends after fighting side by side the previous day. I asked Dracos, it's true, Kreru replied, gesturing to the Dionian officers. But don't underestimate him. Look at these officers. They usually look down on us, but their demeanor now is entirely different. I know, Rotem said. Uncle Bajalipi says Davos is a descendant of a Greek deity and has never lost a battle. No Dionian dares disrespect him. A soldier sprinted from the eastern camp, shouting, Lord Davos is here. Dracos commanded, prepare. Officers straightened their gear as horns and drums sounded. A long column appeared. I led them, wearing a simple linothorax and bronze greaves, distinguished only by a new-style iron helmet adorned with red and purple plumes. My face was visible, broad-browed, sharp-nosed, and dignified. My steady, powerful stride exuded vitality and authority. The Bycinian onlookers watched the disciplined Dionian soldiers with newfound awe. I approached Dracos, who saluted sharply. Commander, the 2nd Legion welcomes you. I returned the salute, joking. Quite a display, Dracos. When did you learn this? Dracos glanced sheepishly at Adrianx. I laughed. Adrianx's idea? The Isthmian Games left their mark. But let's keep things simple until the war is won. Adrianx, initially wary of criticism, accepted the advice. You're right, my lord. We must remain focused on the war. I hugged Adrianx warmly. I was stunned to hear you took Bycinia with only 700 men. A bold, decisive victory. You and your 1st Battalion deserve a star for this. Adrianx beamed, his earlier insecurities vanishing. I then saluted Dracos solemnly. The 2nd Legion's capture and defense of Bycinia is the key to conquering Brutium. I thank you and your men for your sacrifice. Empty, Dracos grinned, feeling proud that his legion was no longer just a subordinate to the 1st. I patted his shoulder. Where is the hero who crossed the Crathis River? He was injured during the crossing and is being treated in the city, Dracos replied. Is it serious? I asked with concern. Broken ribs and lung damage, but he will recover with rest. We must ensure he is well cared for, I insisted. We owe our victory to him. Rest assured, my lord. Seeing a group approaching, I walked toward the eldest Bycinian. Are you leader Bajalipi? Bajalipi bowed to perform the highest Brutii greeting. I am Bajalipi, leader of the Pega tribe, greeting Archon Davos. I stopped him, saying warmly, thank you. Without your help, peace would not have returned so quickly. Your selfless decision saved countless lives. The elderly Bajalipi, who had been branded a traitor by his own people, was deeply moved by my recognition. Because of your service, the Dionian Senate has voted to invite you to join them as a senator, just like Wyzaba and Hemin of Lucania. Will you accept? Bajalipi was stunned, then answered immediately, fearing I might retract the offer. I will. I am honored by the Senate's trust. I grabbed his arms and laughed. Excellent. We are family now. Dracos and Adrianks offered their congratulations, and Bajalipi finally smiled. Remembering his companion, Bajalipi turned. Lord Davos, let me introduce Leader Brim of Bycinia. I interrupted, having studied my files. It was your help that allowed Dracos to hold the fortress. The Senate invites you to join them as well. Brim was dazed. He knew Bycinia was no longer Brudii, but joining a Greek-led alliance was a sudden adjustment. Bajalipi nudged him. I am very happy, Brim muttered. I laughed. Senator Brim, recover well. We will need your help in the coming battles. As Brim responded, Kreru stepped forward. I looked at him and declared, I know you, Kreru, Bycinia's hero. Without your courage, our soldiers would not have returned home so easily. Kreru was stunned and flattered to learn that the Dionian Archon knew his name and deeds. I explained that while I had proposed Kreru for the Senate, the elders felt he needed administrative experience as a Dionian official first. In truth, I only made the proposal for show. I didn't want to lower the Senate standards with an inexperienced youth, despite the earlier inclusion of men like Amintus. Though disappointed, Kreru remained humble, acknowledging his lack of experience compared to Bajalipi and Blum, and pledged to help his people adapt to Dionia. I was satisfied with the young chieftain's steady demeanor. Before entering the city, I visited the riverbank. Amidst the roaring Crathis River, I heard Dracos recount the raid on Bycinia. Moved by the memory of that perilous night, I declared that Sekelian deserved a place in the Hall of Heroes for his bravery, hoping such examples would inspire all Dionian citizens. Dracos agreed wholeheartedly. The Bycinian locals finally understood how their city fell. I addressed them, promising that after the war, I would build a bridge over the river to transform Bycinia from a remote, impoverished town into a prosperous hub connecting Thurii to the Kazinsa Plateau. My vision deeply stirred the Bycinian leaders. Back at the gates, I refused to bring my main force into the city, ordering them to expand the eastern camp instead, though the sight of 10,000 armed soldiers still intimidated the locals. Inside the assembly hall, I and the Bycinian leaders negotiated the city's status. The Senate would appoint a city magistrate to oversee administration. Tribal leaders retained jurisdiction over their own people and lands, free from interference by the magistrate. Leaders were responsible for collecting land taxes and ensuring participation in military training. As the first Brudii town to join, tribes could apply to relocate to more fertile lands. Bycinians would share the same rights and duties as Lacanians, with the freedom to leave their tribes if desired. After the agreement, Bajalipi hesitated before making a request. I invited him to speak. Bajalipi noted that as a powerful Archon, I had too few guards. He offered his nephew, Rotem, as a bodyguard to protect me and learn the ways of a Dionian citizen. Other nobles immediately clamored to offer their own sons as guards. The requests continued, with some offering multiple sons. This was a Bycinian tradition. They hoped that by placing their kin near the Archon, they could secure their family's status and gain favor with the new regime. I understood their motives, though I recalled that Dionian law limited the Archon's guard to 100 men, led by Marcius. Empty, I trusted the steady Marcius. I realized that by incorporating these Bycinian youths into the guard, which also served at the Senate and temples, I could assimilate the Bycinian elite into Dionian culture and politics. I agreed to accept them as volunteers, intending to discuss the formal expansion with the Senate later. Soon, a 60-man Bycinian guard was formed. I appointed Rotem as captain and entrusted them with my security for the night. Dracos and Kapus strongly opposed this decision. I insisted, arguing that Bycinian soldiers were now Dionian soldiers, and a commander must trust his men. They compromised. Marcius would guard the exterior, while the Bycinians guarded the interior. Rotem and his men were deeply moved and vowed to protect me. The nervous Bycinian public was greatly reassured by this gesture of trust. The Bycinian leaders were equally relieved, knowing that any harm to me would result in the total destruction of their city by the surrounding Dionian legions. The night passed peacefully. The next day, I met with my commanders and the Bycinian leaders to plan the march toward the Kazinsa Plateau. Sensing waited for his reinforcements to return, but instead saw Jinnate flee back with only a few hundred wounded survivors. Sensing was incredulous, questioning how Dionian troops could be at Pixis when he had been monitoring Grimentum. Jinnate explained that the attackers were likely from Elia. Though they wore Greek armor, their stature and voices were clearly Lacanian. Sensing realized they must have come from Nerulum, wondering how his scouts missed them. Jinnate coughed, explaining that they likely sailed from Laos, bypassing the coast to avoid detection. With 3,000 or 4,000 enemies, he asked his father for instructions. Return to Pixis immediately. Sensing sensed disaster. Can you still manage? Jinnate nodded weakly, coughing. What about the tribes? Bring them. If they refuse, we'll do what we did at Grimentum, Sensing said coldly. A scout rushed in. Great chieftain, 4,000 Dionian soldiers are approaching from the north. 5,000 tribal warriors are closing in from the south. Grimentum's army has sortied, led by Bagul. Sensing broke into a cold sweat. Bagul isn't injured? It appears not, great chieftain. Sensing stood frozen. A conspiracy. The Dionians planned this all along. Forced the leaders of the Lud and Brina tribes to come here, by any means necessary. A Pixis leader stumbled in. The Lud and Brina have started a rebellion. Sensing vomited blood in rage. Dionian forces attacked from 3 sides, easily overrunning the chaotic camp. Jinnate was killed. Sensing fled into the mountains with a few followers while the rest surrendered. Legate Hieronymus, how shall we handle the captives? Bagul asked. I ordered them enslaved as state labor for mining and construction, Hieronymus replied. Keep 1,000 to force the surrender of Pixis city. Bagul, return to guard Grimentum. Monitor Potentia and report any anomalies. Understood. Agathias, speed up the cleanup so the men can rest. I'll watch them like a shepherd, Agathias laughed. The 3rd Legion's carefully executed trap succeeded. Hieronymus smiled with relief. Assist stopped Bagul. I say, don't be too kind to those who surrender, or they will forget their errors. Use the stick to instill fear. It's the bread and stick method. We gave these tribes land and livestock, yet they betrayed us when danger arose. This punishment will serve as a lesson to all Lacanian tribes. Choose bread or the stick. Bagul watched the soldiers clearing the battlefield, burning corpses and gathering spoils. I hope this brings true peace to the Lucania region, Bagul sighed. He clapped Assists on the shoulder. Sensing is finished. Let's celebrate at your place tonight. A month later, Sensing's own followers, exhausted by his madness and the harsh mountain life, murdered him in his sleep and surrendered at Grimentum. Qianluan returned to Cosentia to find the rebellious tribes had already fled. While he was busy pacifying the city, a messenger arrived from Nepetia. Qianluan was shocked to learn Nepetia was failing after only 10 days, specifically due to 2 terrifying new Dionian siege weapons. Empty. The messenger described catapults that shattered walls with massive stones and mobile siege towers that allowed archers to dominate the ramparts and deploy drawbridges. Fearing these weapons would destroy Cosentia, Qianluan realized Nepetia must be held to prevent a pincer attack. With the Dionians holding the advantage, Qianluan decided a risky offensive was their only hope for victory. He focused on Bycinia, the likely staging ground for the Dionian main force. He sent 2,000 reinforcements to Nepetia and summoned elders Bojemu and Sidorums to gather more warriors for the coming battle. I waited 2 days in Bycinia for supplies. To improve logistics, I ordered every soldier to carry 5 days' worth of rations. On the 3rd morning, a 24,000-strong army marched west toward Cosentia. By noon, scouts reported the Dionian army entering the Cosentia plateau, the Archon's banner clearly visible. Qianluan convened an emergency council with the remaining 5 elders, the mood heavy with the loss of Nikulu and the ongoing siege of Nepetia. Qianluan marked a spot 6 miles east of Cosentia on the map, urging the elders to launch a surprise attack while the Dionians were distracted by camp construction, forcing a decisive battle under Amara's protection. Sidorums understood the discomfort Qianluan referred to. The high altitude of Cosentia caused fatigue and breathing difficulties for outsiders during exertion, whereas the local Brutii warriors were fully acclimated. Aware of the dire situation at Clampetia, Sidorums had little faith in a passive defense. Sidorums and Bojamu exchanged grim looks and agreed to mobilize their troops. However, just half an hour later, Pianluan summoned them back urgently. The Dionians have halted and are setting up camp near the Punit River. Pianluan reported anxiously. Sidorums and Bojamu rushed to the map. The Punit River was a mere stream flowing into the upper Crathis, located on relatively flat terrain roughly halfway between Bycinia and Kazensa. They're stopping so far away and so early? Bojamu muttered in confusion. Those Bycinian traitors. Amara will punish them. Faladaru cursed furiously. Sidorums knew the high priest was angry because the lower altitude at the Punit River meant the Dionians would suffer no environmental disadvantage. He turned to Pianluan. What is the great chieftain's plan? Pianluan, blaming the Bycinian informants for ruining his ambush, was livid. He addressed the group sternly. Clampetia is on the verge of falling. We must choose. Let the enemy slowly adapt to our environment, or commit our full strength to attack them now. Sidorums and Bojamu exchanged a resolute look. Do we have any other choice? Amara will protect the sons of Brudii. Faladaru chanted. Meanwhile, I chose the Punit site out of caution. Warned by Bajalipi about altitude sickness, I recognized the risk of oxygen-depleted air during intense combat. While not as extreme as the high plateaus of the east, it could be a decisive factor. I opted to advance steadily, allowing my troops to acclimate, while keeping pressure on Kazensa to prevent them from reinforcing Clampetia. Trusting Silas and the 4th Legion siege engines, I believed that once Clampetia fell, the Dionian pincer movement would shatter the Brudii alliance without further major conflict. Despite my confidence, I followed strict military law. The 1st Legion and reserves built the camp, assisted by Freeman, while the 2nd Legion and allies stood guard. Why are we doing the digging? We're the 1st Legion. Hebateloosi grumbled while watching the resting 2nd Legion. PZR speculated. Maybe it's a reward for the 2nd Legion's recent battle. Laeokikadisi observed the scene, finding the Dionian obsession with fortified camps, complete with engineer inspections, far more rigid than the Spartan approach he was used to. If we had been the ones attacking Bycinia, we'd have done better. The commander is unfair, giving them the glory while we just march until my feet blister. Hebateloosi complained. Captain Sitarsis slapped his head. Shut up and work. If you slow us down and we lose to Oliverus's cohort, Matones won't be lenient. At the mention of Matones, Hebateloosi fell silent. Laeokikadisi admired Matones, a powerful captain who fiercely protected his men, often clashing with military judges to defend them, earning him deep respect. No content. Matones demanded 2 things: absolute forward momentum in battle and total superiority over Oliverus's 6th cohort. This rivalry was encouraged by officers across the army, manifesting in sports like rugby and football to foster unit pride and competitiveness. Laeokikadisi realized this culture of competition transformed simple farmers and merchants into elite citizen soldiers. Prosis, Hebateloosi asked. You're a Laconian. Have you ever fought the Spartans? After their shared experiences, Laeokikadisi had grown close to his squad. He kept digging to hide his expression and replied softly. I have. Hebateloosi leaned in. Who's better, them or us? Laeokikadisi was caught off guard. The other soldiers gathered around, and even Sitarsis didn't stop them. Laeokikadisi was uniquely qualified to answer, having been raised in Sparta but serving in the Dionian ranks for half a year. He set down his pickaxe and explained, Spartans begin the brutal agoge at 6, living in barracks until adulthood, where their final test is to kill a helot. That's cruel, a soldier shouted. Laeokikadisi continued, his Spartan pride showing. After that, they do nothing but train for war until they die. They are the world's best warriors. Killing is as natural to them as drinking water. Some teammates hissed in dissatisfaction. Prosis, are you really a Laconian, praising the Spartans like that? Someone complained. Laeokikadisi was startled, having grown too comfortable with his squad. He quickly added, but the Spartans are too few. Their citizen count is barely half of 1 Dionian legion. Even with the Perioikoi, they barely exceed 10,000. Dionian soldiers are the best non-professional fighters I've ever seen. Your military system is unique and superior to Sparta's. Most importantly, Our numbers are growing after every victory against the Bruttians. I understand, Prosus. We can't beat a Spartan one-on-one, but in a real battle, they lack the numbers to defeat us, right? Hebataluosi interjected. Our legions emphasize teamwork. A single Spartan is no match for 4 or 5 coordinated Dionian soldiers, Pesiars added. Exactly. Like a rugby running back, you can't score without your teammates, another shouted. Laoki Kadisi recognized him as a former reserve citizen who had once been a disciplinary problem. Now, he was a competent soldier, a testament to how Dionia's training and sports culture rapidly transformed undisciplined Greeks into effective warriors. Sparta relied on strict discipline and endless training, concepts most city-states failed to grasp. Yet, the newly formed Dionia adopted these principles from the start, all under the guidance of the divinely favored Archon. It seemed this young man was even more formidable than Sparta itself. Fearing his teammates might underestimate the enemy, Laoki warned, Spartans rarely fight alone. They lead the Peloponnesian League and dominate Greece, with countless allies fighting for them. Their commanders are also highly skilled. Hey, I'm just comparing them to us. We have allies too, Laos, Castron. Hebataluosi retorted. And Heraclea, the South Italy alliance counts too. Croton, Cilicium, Tyrrhena, Colonia, others chimed in. Laoki was moved. While cities across the eastern Mediterranean trembled at the mere mention of Sparta, these Dionian soldiers discussed them without fear, their confidence forged by repeated victories. Their shouting drew the ire of squad leader Parmenius. Stop the chatter and dig the trench. Do you want to face military law? The men quickly dispersed to their tasks. Sergeant Sitarsis approached and whispered, Good talk, Prosus. But next time, remember to say we instead of you. Laoki felt embarrassed. Deep down, he hadn't fully integrated into Dionia. Meanwhile, as the First Legion worked, I conferred with Tryphius, commander of the Heraclean allies. You want our engineers to build bridges in Heraclea? Yes, Lord Davos. We've heard of your expertise, and seeing the bridges at Thurii confirmed it. Heraclea is built on a delta between the Agri River and its tributaries. During the rainy season, our floating bridges wash away, and we must use boats just to reach our fields. We desperately need sturdy bridges like yours. I readily agreed. As our ally, we are happy to help. I hear Shao Helicelide is a master bridge builder. Heraclea would like to donate 50 tons of wheat to thank him and his team for their efforts. Tryphius offered sincerely. I accepted. The grain was a welcome relief. I respected Tryphius's gesture, recognizing it as a sign of Heraclea's commitment to the alliance. The agreement made their conversation warmer and more casual. I even remarked that the Cosentia region had excellent pastures for breeding warhorses. Their talk was interrupted by the herald Tormid, who arrived looking tense. Commander, Lades reports that a massive Brution force is marching this way. How many? I asked. The cavalry estimates 20,000. 20,000. My expression hardened. The Brution alliance clearly intended a decisive battle. I hadn't planned for a major engagement here, but since the enemy had abandoned their defensive advantage to challenge me, I would accept the fight. With forces evenly matched, I stood up. How is the camp coming along? The trench is dug, and the ramparts are being built, Tormid replied. Should we retreat behind the defenses? I refused. The Dionian legions favored the offensive. Hiding behind trenches would only stifle my soldiers' morale. Sound the assembly. Summon the legates Capus and Dracos, the cavalry captain Lades, and Epitenes and Zippite, I ordered. Yes. Tormid rushed off. Are we really fighting the Bruttians here? Tryphius asked nervously. Yes, the war ends today. I smiled confidently. Reassured, Tryphius saluted. Then allow me to gather my men. Pienloin led his army toward the Punit River. From the high ground, he looked down at the Dionians, who appeared to be in a chaotic, disorganized state as they formed up. Halt and prepare to deploy, he commanded. Observing the enemy, he noted the Dionians were backed by the confluence of the Punit and Crathis rivers, with open plains to their left and a messy trench system behind them. He decided on his formation. 5,000 tribal warriors on the left, 5,000 from Ambalia and Vigia in the center, and his 12,000 strongest Cosentian warriors on the right. He intended to use his superior numbers and the Cosentian elite on the right flank to secure victory. Qianluan hoped to attack while the enemy was disorganized, but the Bruttians lacked the discipline, command structure, and training to form up quickly, resulting in a chaotic, noisy mess of shifting troops. Initially relaxed, Qianluan's expression darkened as he observed the enemy's progress. The Daonians had rapidly organized into small, orderly blocks that shifted into position like building blocks without interfering with one another, quickly establishing a coherent formation. Qianluan had never seen such a formation. The gaps between the blocks made it look like a green and white wool blanket. While its effectiveness was unknown, the speed of their deployment unsettled him. He ordered Petaru to urge Bojiamu to accelerate their own formation. The initial chaos Qianluan saw was merely the First Legion scrambling from their camp. Now that the formation was taking shape, I felt my anxiety subside. Tormod arrived, reporting anxiously that the right wing was still forming. I remained calm, noting that the right wing, composed of allies and reserves, was the most disorganized. Dust from the dry, rainless autumn obscured the view, but I was unperturbed. I found it reassuring that Triphias was also taking his time to reorganize rather than rushing to attack. Pointing to the Bruttians on the grassy slope, I noted they were also stationary, allowing my First Legion time to rest and recover stamina. Tormod looked toward the dust-filled horizon. I ordered Lades to send several cavalry platoons to harass the enemy's flanks and center, delaying their formation and gathering intelligence. Understood. Remind Lades, this is harassment, not a pitched battle. If the enemy cavalry pursues, retreat immediately to preserve our strength, I emphasized. Understood, my lord. The soldiers joked and bantered as they prepared to move out. Sorikos led his platoon across the battlefield to the Punit River. Halt. Dismount. Sorikos commanded. Despite the men's protests about not reaching the enemy, he insisted on obedience. The men grumbled, fearing they would be labeled cowards while others were already throwing javelins. Quiet. We have the longest distance to cover. The horses need rest to perform properly. I brought you here, and I intend to bring you back safely. Fine, Captain. How long? Wait for my command. The men waited impatiently, watching their comrades dart in and out of the dust clouds, their nerves frayed by the distant sounds of combat. When Sorikos finally shouted, "Mount up!" the men were revitalized. The 50 horses broke into a trot, forming a wedge. Sorikos signaled the charge. They faced a 30-meter grassy slope, requiring careful momentum to avoid being vulnerable while climbing. The riders leaned forward, urging their horses to maintain speed up the incline. Reaching the top, Sorikos saw the dense, seemingly endless ranks of Brution warriors stretching from the riverbank. Feeling dwarfed by the sheer scale of the enemy, Sorikos took a deep breath, drew a javelin, and spurred his horse into a final sprint. His men followed. The thunder of hooves on dry earth created a deafening sound, causing visible panic within the newly formed Brution lines. As the Bruttians jostled in confusion, Sorikos and his men unleashed a volley of javelins, drawing cries of pain. Chaos erupted in the enemy ranks. Sorikos signaled a sharp left turn, riding parallel to the front line to maximize the disruption before ordering a withdrawal. As they retreated, Brution cavalry pursued, but Daunian light infantry intervened with javelins, forcing them back. I used the cavalry's firepower reconnaissance to gauge the Brution response. The left wing was weakest, while the right was strongest, a mirror of my own tactical arrangement. I positioned my strongest forces on the flanks, intending to use the 2nd Legion on the left to achieve a decisive breakthrough and encirclement. Confident in my plan, I ordered Lades to pull the cavalry back to rest. Lades protested, concerned about the 500 or 600 enemy cavalry on the right wing. They will be handled. Your cavalry is reserved for the final, lethal blow. Rest your men and horses, I insisted. Lades reluctantly complied. I summoned Epitines and Zippite, tasking them with using light infantry and freemen to harass the enemy's right wing and repel their cavalry. It is a difficult task. Can you do it? We fought Persian cavalry and archers and won. Are the Bruttians any stronger? Epitines replied confidently. Hades will protect us. Zipite chanted. Seeing their resolve, I gave a solemn salute. I await news of your victory. With my deployment complete, I waited for the Brution assault. Marcius and Rotem approached, reporting that the Bycinia leaders, Brim and Kreru, insisted on an audience. I saw the two Bycinia leaders shouting behind my guards and strode over to them. Diani and Archon, we demand to fight at the front, not hide like cowards. This is an insult to our warriors. Brim shouted. Insult? I looked at the Herald Tormid, confused. Tormid explained. I have told Chief Brim repeatedly, but he refuses to accept the reserve role. I turned cold. Since Bycinia warriors are now Dianian, they must obey orders. If you cannot leave, let our true Dianian soldiers claim the glory. Translate that exactly. I walked away. Tormid watched as Brim and Kreru left, looking disgruntled. Lord, aren't you worried they'll leave in anger? Tormid asked. I smiled. The more you explain to stubborn men, the more they demand. It's better to shut it down. Even if they leave, we will still win. Tormid sent a messenger to watch them. Brim had returned and was waiting quietly. Tormid felt ashamed. My understanding of human nature was beyond his years. By late afternoon, Pianluin saw his Brutii warriors losing their initial fervor. He knew his people, brave yet timid, passionate yet insecure. They needed inspiration. He rode to the front and shouted, Brutii, for centuries we lived free on this plateau. Umlan nurtured us. Brutus gave us peace. Now, invaders occupy our towns and slaughter our kin. Dionians, damn Greeks, the warriors roared back. Shall we let these evil foreigners destroy our temples, enslave our children, and strip us of our freedom? Pianluin demanded. No, the 20,000 warriors screamed, pounding their spears. Their morale surged. Pianluin pointed his spear forward. Attack! Horns blared. The Battle of Punit, which would decide the fate of the Brutium region, had begun. Hearing the roar, Tormid asked, Lord Davos, should we also boost morale? Boxing isn't won by the loudest, but by the calmest. My men need to hold their positions. Unnecessary shouting wastes energy and breaks formation. Tormid nodded, convinced. They're attacking. Sound the defense. I ordered, moving behind the lines. Bronze horns sounded. Soldiers stood, tightened their grips, and closed the gaps in their ranks. The Dionian legions and the coalition forces linked into a solid front. Epitines and Zipite led 4,000 light infantry to the left. Zipite's 2,500 troops stopped 50 meters out to deploy archers and slingers, while Epitines took 1,000 peltasts in a long column toward the flank. The Brutii line, 8 miles long, moved forward without reserves. The Brutii dispersed their archers, their most numerous unit, among the front line, followed by shield spearmen. On the right, 600 cavalry, the tribal elite, prepared to charge. As they descended the slope, the Brutii right was pelted by Dionian slingers. The infantry advanced slowly, but their light troops sprinted ahead. The Brutii cavalry accelerated, seeking to avenge the earlier harassment by the Dionian horsemen. The riders surged forward, spotting the enemy cavalry 300 meters away. The leader planned to crush the light infantry before hitting the enemy horse, but noticed figures moving rapidly toward them from the side. Before he could react, a volley of javelins struck the charging line. Chaos erupted as men and horses fell, tripping those behind. Epitines had feigned a retreat to lure them into an ambush. Empty, the cavalry slowed, becoming easy targets in the dust and confusion. Seeing the chaos, the lead riders turned back to attack the peltasts to save their comrades. Epitines didn't scatter. He led his peltasts to meet the charge, knowing they couldn't stop horses with a phalanx, but could use agility. The veterans prepared their javelins. Throw! Epitines roared. Javelins pierced the horses' necks. The horses screamed and threw their riders. The peltasts drew their falx blades, rolling under the horses or using shields to deflect hooves, slashing at the horses' legs to bring them down. Meanwhile, Zipite's forces engaged the Brutii light infantry. Arrows filled the sky like a dark cloud, raining death upon the ranks. The Brutii light infantry faltered. They were outnumbered by the concentrated Dionian archers. However, in the center and right, the Brutii light troops pressed within 50 meters, raining arrows and javelins upon the Dionian soldiers. Dionian legionaries formed a shield wall, using thick bronze shields and iron helmets to deflect enemy projectiles. Officers shouted, "Steady! Don't rush!" to prevent soldiers from impulsively throwing javelins, which would compromise the formation and cause unnecessary casualties. As the Brutii infantry approached, the peltasts retreated through gaps in the ranks to avoid being crushed in the frontline melee. The Brutii infantry began their charge, roaring as they rushed the waiting Dionian phalanx. Unlike the aggressive Brutii, the Dionian soldiers remained calm, eyes fixed on the closing distance. At the officer's command, javelins, a cloud of projectiles erupted from the 7-mile-long line. The Brutii suffered heavy losses, yet they accelerated over their fallen comrades, slamming into the shield wall and creating numerous breaches before the Dionians could reload. As Brutii warriors surged into the gaps, the 3rd and 4th ranks of Dionians moved up, using spears to force them back. Amidst the clash of shields and spears, Onodas concluded the morning Greek lesson as the sun hit the sundial. He instructed the students to memorize Hesiod's poem and the new vocabulary for tomorrow's inspection. "Understood, teacher," the students replied. Onodas singled out Patroclus, warning him to study harder to avoid detention. Patroclus hung his head as his classmates laughed. His poor performance in Greek contrasted sharply with his speed and accuracy in mathematics. As Onodas left, the students rushed out. Stiflos grabbed Patroclus, urging him to hurry before the food ran out. They collided with a young girl at a corner. Cynthia scolded them and checked on the fallen girl, Jisha. Jisha replied softly that she was fine. Cynthia demanded an apology, and the boys nervously complied. Jisha kindly told them to go buy their cream bread. The boys ran off, with Patroclus stealing a glance at Cynthia. Cynthia grumbled that Jisha was too soft. Jisha smiled and brushed off the dust. Cynthia invited Jisha to lunch, mentioning her mother's specific request to bring her home. Jisha nodded shyly. Afternoons at the Thurii primary school were reserved for military training and sports. Local merchants set up shops outside the school to serve the growing population, including a popular eatery run by Archon's wife, Calixioia, famous for its cream bread. Cynthia and Jisha became close friends. Calixioia treated Jisha warmly, especially knowing she was the adopted daughter of Senator Alexis, a veteran of the 1st Legion. The delta between the Crathis and Koshines rivers, once a polluted, crime-ridden area for state slaves, had been transformed. I had consulted with Kunigarata and Maligi on its redevelopment. The slave quarters were moved near the northern military camp for surveillance. Workshops were relocated to industrial zones, and the rivers were cleared of pollution. The area became a cultural hub, housing the new Dionian Academy, which would include a medical school led by Hirpulisai, a math institute by Mentotai and a history group by Ansitanos. To ensure peace, I commissioned Shao Helikeli to build a new bridge for heavy transport, while planning a permanent stone bridge between the cities north and south. Patroclus and Stiflos ate lunch and headed to the Temple of Athena. Originally dedicated to Apollo, the temple was renamed for Athena to honor Athens' aid, though it saw few visitors after the city-state severed ties with Athens. The square was a popular playground for the boys, where 13-year-old Patroclus was a star athlete. Today, however, they sat on the temple wall, bored and throwing stones into the river. Patroclus worriedly complained about not seeing his father for 2 months, lamenting that the 1st Legion hadn't allowed them to visit during their last pass through Thurii. Stiflos joked that his father was likely just afraid of being disciplined for leaving his post. Patroclus glared at him. Stiflos clarified that Amyntas wasn't his biological father, but a kind man. Stiflos expressed pride in Amyntas's service under me, confident that the great Archon's leadership would keep him safe. My optimism was contagious, and Patroclus agreed. "You're right, the Dionian Legion is invincible." A child burst into the temple. "Good news. Good news." "Proclus, what news?" the other children asked, pausing their games. "Rejoice. My father's 3rd Legion has crushed the invading Pixis forces." Proclus shouted excitedly. "Is it true?" Patroclus asked. "Of course. Go to Thurii. The whole city is celebrating," Proclus boasted. Stiflos, worried about his own foster father, retorted, "No one doubts the victory, but it was surely I who secured it." Proclus glared at him. Regardless, my father is commanding in Gramentum. Where's yours? Stiflos was left speechless. The other children cheered, "Victory! Long live Dionia! Long live the Legion!" The children began playing a triumph game, with Patroclus dragging Proclus and Stiflos into the ranks, though they soon bickered over who would be the flag-bearer. Meanwhile, in the Senate of Thurii, the councillors were debating league affairs. Rotating Chairman Maligi held up a papyrus scroll. Magistrate Scombras reports that Crimissa citizens are refusing to buy wheat bonds. While other cities have sold out, Crimissa hasn't even reached half its quota. Amicles wants the remaining bonds for Castiglione. Agreed, the senators echoed. Cunigurata mused. With a 15% return, why the resistance? We should investigate. All eyes turned to Antorus. Antorus coughed nervously. Crimissa joined only 6 months ago. Unlike others, they still harbor resentment over the war with Croton and the losses they suffered. Trust takes time. A brief silence followed. Cornelius stated, "War was unavoidable, but we must work to heal their grief. I hope Antorus, Eurycpus, and Pleiades will assist." Eurycpus vowed, "As counselors and Crimizans, we will ensure our people feel proud to be Dionian citizens." The Senate agreed. Polixenes stood up, regarding the bonds. Marsis once said our grain reserves would only last 2 months. Is that correct? Marsis nodded reluctantly. Yes, but Polixenes interrupted. Even with Bycinia taken, conquering Brutium's vast population in 2 months is impossible. Meanwhile, the Lacanians are stirring. Does the Senate have a plan for the disaster at Gramentum, with Bagule critically wounded and the Pixis invasion? We have no reserves. If we don't act, the Pixis forces will take Gramentum and threaten Nerulum. A catastrophe is imminent. Polixenes warned. Some senators looked alarmed. Maligi seethed, knowing I had a secret plan. He signaled Plyzenas to refute the claims. Polixenes continued. Our aggressive expansion, Croton, Gramentum, Tarentum, Brutium, has alarmed our neighbors. We must pass laws to restrain such reckless warmongering. The hall fell silent. The jab at me clear to all. Suddenly, the doors swung open with a loud bang. Felicius entered, looking radiant. Maligi seized the moment. Felicius, you are late. Apologies, Felicius bowed. I was meeting a messenger from the 3rd Legion. I have great news. The 3rd Legion crushed the Pixis and Gramentum rebels. Most were captured, and we suffered minimal losses. Hieronymus is now marching on Pixis. The city is undefended and will fall soon. The hall erupted in cheers. A glorious victory. We shall have a city on the west coast. The senators who had been sweating moments ago were now ecstatic. Polixenes stood stunned, muttering, I didn't expect Hieronymus to achieve a victory like mine. Actually, Felicius corrected, this was planned by me, with help from Laus and Elia. Cunigurata and Cornelius nodded, satisfied, and began asking for details. Polixenes fell silent. The Battle of the Punit River had raged for over an hour, the front line curving into a crescent. On the Dionian right flank, Tryphius's troops held firm, as the fragmented Brution tribes failed to coordinate an effective assault against the phalanx. In the center, the 1st Legion's phalanx buckled under the fierce assault of Vergae, Ambalia, and Cosentia warriors. Exhausted from long hours of camp construction, the soldiers struggled to maintain their formation under the weight of their heavy armor. On the left, the 2nd Legion held a stalemate against the Cosentia warriors. The Cosentia, possessing superior endurance and larger frames, maintained high-intensity attacks, while the 2nd Legion relied on disciplined defense and cohort coordination to survive. On the far left, Epitines's peltasts dominated the Brutii cavalry. Forced to engage to prevent the peltasts from reinforcing other sectors, the Brutii cavalry skirmished from the periphery, but were steadily whittled down by Dionian javelins and arrows. Zippites' light infantry faced trouble when the Brutii, frustrated by their inability to win at range, abandoned skirmishing to engage in brutal close-quarters combat with javelins and short blades. Though retreating was standard for light infantry, Zippite held his ground to protect Epitines's flank. His force, comprised of light infantry and freemen, began to falter under the pressure of the fierce Brutii warriors. I intervened by deploying the Mountain Reconnaissance Battalion. These lightly armored, sword-wielding soldiers rushed to the left flank and immediately turned the tide of the battle. A messenger galloped toward me, where Tormid intercepted him. Tormid reported, "Commander, Capua sends word that the First Legion is at its limit. They can barely lift their shields." I concluded the First Legion had reached its physical breaking point. Tormid added, "Draco's reports that parts of the Second Legion are also suffering from exhaustion, and he fears ordering maneuvers will cause a collapse." I sensed victory. I ordered Tormid to send the Bycinia leaders, Blum and Krem, to the left flank to crush the Cosentia forces with a swift, decisive strike. Tormid accepted the order with excitement. I then commanded, "Tell Late's cavalry to assist Epitines and Zipite in routing the enemy. Then wheel north to strike the enemy's center from the rear, sandwiching them with the First Legion." Tormid rode off to deliver the orders personally. I peered into the distance at the reserve units, barely visible through the haze. Once Tormid returned to confirm their deployment, I ordered the horns to sound. The piercing signal echoed across the battlefield. Hearing the signal, Xanthoparis and the other officers rallied their men, who held firm knowing the reserve force had finally arrived. Drums beat and standards advanced. Despite their exhaustion, the soldiers of the First and Second Legions were reinvigorated. Pienluin, fighting in the Brutii right wing, pushed forward with his Cosentia warriors, sensing the Dionians were near collapse. The sudden sound of the Dionian horns shook him, sparking fear of enemy reinforcements. Desperate, Pienluin urged his men forward, but the Second Legion's defense stiffened, making further progress increasingly difficult. Over 2,000 Bycinia warriors, led by Blum and Kreru, charged around the flank and slammed into the rear of the Brutii right wing. The Cosentia warriors panicked as they saw the Bycinia forces attacking from behind. "It's the Bycinia. We're surrounded," they cried, turning in disarray. Late's cavalry routed the remaining Brutii cavalry and light infantry, then joined the advance. As the Bycinia struck the rear, the exhausted Cosentia forces began to shatter. Pienluin, refusing to accept defeat, screamed for his men to continue the attack, nearly being trampled in the chaos. His guards forcibly dragged him away to safety. Tormid reported to me, "Commander, we have won. The enemy is in full retreat." I remained calm. The battle isn't over. We must maximize our results. I knew that in open warfare, the greatest casualties occurred during the pursuit of a broken, demoralized enemy. I kept the horns sounding to maintain the pressure. Dionian soldiers discarded heavy gear and pursued the enemy, coordinating with the reinforcements to encircle the fleeing Brutii. The Bycinia, light infantry, and mountain reconnaissance battalion formed a loose net, trapping the panicked Brutii. Amidst the Dionian war cries, many Brutii simply dropped their weapons and surrendered. Late's cavalry swept the plateau like a sieve. By dusk, they returned bloodied and exhausted, earning the permanent moniker Blood Cavalry. The battle ended with a decisive Dionian victory, 1,500 Dionian casualties against nearly 5,000 Brutii dead and 5,000 captured. Lades arrived to celebrate, only to find I had already left for the cremation grounds. Walking across the corpse-strewn battlefield, I felt the joy of victory vanish. Soldiers laid out their fallen comrades in endless rows, tearfully placing 2 obols on each dead man's eyes as an offering to Hades. My pace slowed as I recognized a group of soldiers weeping over a body. At the center was Ketapussi, a centurion of the Second Legion. I stepped forward, asking, "Who is it?" The officers and soldiers hurriedly saluted. He saw the face of Arsenes, a bright young man from Amendalara, a hero of the Croton War, and a former flag-bearer. He had died leading a charge, struck by a spear. I placed 2 obols on the boy's eyes, remembering how we had raced in swimming just a year ago. I stared at the funeral pyres, asking Tormid if the war against the Brutii was truly right. Tormid hesitated, unsure how to respond. My expression hardened. "Of course it is. In this era, it is either kill or be killed. There is no other way to survive." Tormid agreed, recalling the oppression he had seen from Persians, Spartans, Carthaginians, and Syracusans. Yet, he didn't know that I was actually worried about a rising Latin city-state called Rome. "The First Legion and the reserves are exhausted," Capys reported sadly. "They fell asleep instantly, not even removing their armor." I sighed at the intensity of the battle but warned Capus. It's autumn. The mountain nights are cold. They'll get sick. The medical corps is already full. I don't want more casualties. Antonios, serving as military officer, suggested, let the baggage train auxiliaries cover them with the blankets the soldiers carry. I nodded, then turned to Drax, the 2nd Legion's legate, who stood fidgeting. I scrutinized him. Will the camp be ready by nightfall? The 2nd Legion is forcing the prisoners to build it, alongside the Mountain Brigade, Bycinia warriors, and the allies under Tryphias and Gorgies. It will be done by dark. Tryphias and Gorgies nodded in confirmation. I thanked them and asked, how are the Brutii prisoners behaving? We punished a dozen who resisted, and with the Bycinia watching, they are obedient. I paced, saying, do not abuse them. If they cannot work, let them rest. Use your judgment. Understood. I noticed an injury on Drax's hand. What happened there? Drax recoiled, stammering. It's nothing, just a minor spear wound. I saw a bloody gash near Drax's carotid artery and realized how lucky the man had been to survive. My face darkened. You charge to the front again. You command 7,000 men, not a common soldier. If you died, the impact would be catastrophic. Do you treat Daunian military law as a joke? Drax hung his head in silence. The surrounding officers watched in tense silence as I scolded the veteran like a child. Hand command of the 2nd Legion to Adrianx. Go to Stesicotas to have that wound dressed, then report to the military judge for punishment. Drax scrambled away as if pardoned. Antonios whispered. He only charged to inspire the exhausted troops. Arsenis was a promising officer, I sighed. If the legate leads by charging, the officers follow suit. I won't have my centurions dying like this. Drax needs to learn. Capus and Antonios remained silent. I asked, Capus, is the 1st Legion guarding the prisoners tonight? Yes. Keep them secure, but treat them humanely. Capus agreed to try. They will soon be our people, I explained. We must minimize hatred to ensure a smooth transition. War is merely an extension of politics. Tryphias and Gorgies exchanged looks, seeing the growth of the Daunian League as a positive. I may send someone to help pacify the prisoners, if he is willing, I mused. Capus didn't ask who. How is the medical corps? Overwhelmed, Antonios replied. Stesicotas is exhausted, and Epitines is using peltasts and freemen to help transport the wounded. Are the Brutii wounded being ignored? I demanded. Antonios, tell Stesicotas to spare doctors immediately. Take 1,000 men from the 1st Legion to assist in cleaning and bandaging the Brutii prisoners. Understood. Antonios hurried off. Tormid, I am writing 2 letters. Have messengers rush them to Herculisai and Mersis in Thurii. Tell them to dispatch as many doctors, nurses, medicine, and food supplies as possible. Once the generals departed, I turned to Tryphias and Gorgies. My apologies, lords. I didn't expect so much administrative work after the victory. Thank you for waiting. It is no trouble, Tryphias praised. It gave me a chance to witness your administrative prowess. I've learned much about the complexities of managing wounded, prisoners, camps, and outposts, things we rarely prioritize. Gorgies agreed. In their era, Greek city-state warfare was usually local and lacked logistical depth. Only major powers like Athens or Syracuse maintained complex supply lines, yet even they struggled. To the visitors, my rough logistics were impressively sophisticated. I smiled. This victory belongs to the support of Heraclea and Castron. Once the war ends, our secretaries will tally the spoils and distribute them to you proportionally. Gorgies, having partnered with Dionia before, trusted their integrity. Wealthy Heraclea cared little for spoils, but Tryphias had a different request. Lord Davos, I have a favor to ask. Speak. Could your officers train our citizens in Daunian tactics? I noticed our styles differ, hindering coordination. Your reserve force held the line against the Bruttians, and if your reserves are that strong, your main legions must be formidable. I feigned hesitation, though I was delighted. Does the Heraclean Senate agree? I will ensure they do, Tryphias vowed. Then after the war, consult with military officer Felicius. But be warned, Daunian training is rigorous. Prepare your citizens. Seeing the example set, Gorgies made the same request for Castron. Exhausted, I prepared for my next meeting. Bring in the Brution leader captured by Lades. Sidorums regretted not praying to Amara before the battle. After falling from his horse and losing his guard, his distinct attire made him an easy target for Dionian cavalry. Captured, he openly identified himself. Bound and escorted, he saw the golden standard on the hill. Beneath it sat me, the Archon of Dionia. Sidorums quickened his pace. They studied each other. I was surprised by Sidorums' age, Sidorums by my youth. I ordered my bonds removed. Sidorums rubbed his wrists. Aren't you afraid I'll attack you? You speak Greek, which saves me a translator. I don't like looking up at people. Sit down. My voice carried an irresistible authority. Sidorums sat, and Marcius, standing behind me, relaxed. To answer you. First, my guards are capable. Second, if you killed me, the Brudians would face unimaginable retribution from my angry soldiers. Sidorums scoffed. Aren't you already slaughtering us and stealing our land? A blow against you would at least bring my people joy. Victims, I retorted. For decades, you have raided Greek cities. Now that we strike back, you cry foul? It's a joke. You are invaders, Sidorums countered. We are reclaiming our land. You migrated here 200 years ago, displacing the original inhabitants. To claim you are the rightful owners is either ignorance or arrogance. Lies, Sidorums snapped. Thurii scholars have recorded your history for centuries. You can read it yourself one day. Sidorums, sensing the truth, deflated. What will you do with us? The prisoners, or your alliance? Us captives. Even if we lost, Cosenza is strong. With Pienluin defending, you'll run out of supplies before you break the walls. We will break Cosenza easily, I replied confidently. I silenced Sidorums. 5,000 Brudians died, mostly Cosenzans, and 5,000 more are captured. Your main strength is shattered. I will offer freedom to the smaller tribes you've oppressed. Do you think they won't rise up to help us take Cosenza? Sidorums trembled. A riot had indeed broken out in Cosenza 2 days ago. And I won't just attack Cosenza. Ambalia is weak, and Vigia. Sidorums flinched at the mention of his home. If I send 10,000 men to Vigia with Laus's help, do you think it will stand? Sidorums clenched his fists, teeth gritted in silent agony. After taking Ambania and Vig, we will assault Cosenza. You must wonder why I haven't attacked Napisha yet, I noted. Because the Dionian 4th Legion will soon capture it. Napisha's stone walls cannot withstand our ballistae and siege towers. Ballistae? Sidorums asked, confused. I briefly explained the new Dionian siege weapon. Sidorums' face paled. He knew Pienluin had sent 2,000 reinforcements to Napisha despite his own objections. Realizing Pienluin had likely hidden the truth to prevent panic, he understood that the battle was a desperate gamble. Chilled, Sidorums stammered. Does Dionia intend to slaughter all the Brudians? No, I replied firmly. I see no difference between Brudians, Lacanians, and Greeks. Sidorums stared at me in disbelief. You wonder why we attack? For a century, our peoples have killed each other endlessly. If the Brutii tribal league forms, conflict will only escalate. Dionia attacks not to destroy you, but to integrate you. The Mediterranean is vast enough for us all to thrive without fighting over barren soil. Sidorums hesitated. You want the Brutii tribes to be allies? Dionia has paid too high a price in blood for mere allies, I retorted sharply. Neither our people nor the Senate would accept that. Then, like the Lacanians of Nerulum? Sidorums asked bitterly. Brutium will be annexed. You will become Dionian citizens. Local leaders will manage their tribes, but the Senate will appoint administrators for cities like Vig, Cosenza, and Napisha. Bycinia has already joined. Bagilipi and Brim are now senators. Speak with them. Sidorums wavered but asked, can we not manage our own cities? Our people won't accept foreign rule. The Senate governs all Dionian territory, I insisted. But if you join the Senate, you could eventually be appointed magistrate of Cosenza or even the entire region. Sidorums hesitated, then deflected. I am only the great chieftain of Vig. Decide for Vig, then, I said. Take your time. As Sidorums turned to leave, I added, one more thing. Sidorums stumbled, startled. Pacify the prisoners. Tell them they will be safe if they comply, but if they incite unrest or flee, they, and their families, will face severe punishment. I will tell them, Sidorums replied, looking aged and weary. As soldiers led him away, Marcius asked, "Will the old man surrender?" "His compliance is a start," I smiled. "But if he's too slow, we won't need him." The siege of Nepetia reached a climax. Days of ballista fire had shattered the walls and filled the trenches, inflicting heavy casualties on the defenders. The Third Legion had also suffered, losing 5 ballistae, 2 siege towers to fire, and over 400 men. Yet, Silas maintained the pressure, remembering my order to master siege warfare regardless of the cost. At dawn, the 4th Legion and Terina troops arrayed before Nepetia with 5 ballistae and 3 siege towers. The exhausted Nepetia defenders trembled at the sight of the massive force. Even the circling crows sensed the danger and fled. "Ready," Silas commanded. Officers ordered the ballistae prepared. Winches turned, strings pulled, and stone projectiles were loaded. "Fire!" 5 stones slammed into the weakest section of the wall, signaling the assault. Continuous bombardment followed. The wall finally collapsed in a roar of dust and stone. Dionian soldiers cheered as the defenders despaired. "Attack!" Silas ordered. Horns blared and drums beat as troops advanced with ladders, while the massive siege towers rolled toward the walls. Empty, Panjaru drew his sword, rallying his men. "We have held for a month. Think of your families. We will not be slaves. We will not be slaves." The warriors roared, drawing their bows. Diolidas, a representative from Croton, watched the assault while delivering supplies to the Dionian camp. Upon returning to Croton, he reported in awe, "The Dionians have invented a terrifying weapon called a ballista. It hurls heavy stones hundreds of meters with precision, shattering stone walls in days." The Dionians also constructed something called a siege tower. It was like a mobile wooden tower, taller than the walls of Nepetia. As the Dionians pushed it toward the city, archers at the top kept firing arrows at the enemies on the ramparts. Once it reached the wall, a heavy drawbridge was immediately lowered from the tower, spanning the top of the wall, and the Dionian soldiers charged onto the battlements of Nepetia via this bridge. The Dionians did not rely solely on ballistae and siege towers. Like us, they also made extensive use of scaling ladders to climb the walls. I saw every one of their soldiers fighting desperately, rarely retreating even when their comrades fell from the walls. Their courage was no less than that of our Crotonian citizens. However, the Nepetia warriors were not as fierce as they had been when facing us in the past. Perhaps it was because their numbers were too few, or perhaps they were terrified by the Dionians' horrific siege engines. In any case, the battle lasted only until the afternoon before the Dionian 4th Legion breached Nepetia, and Panjaru, the great chieftain of Nepetia, was killed in action. After Diolidas finished speaking, the council fell into a heavy silence. News had only recently arrived that the Dionians had captured Bycinia, and now Nepetia had fallen as well. When had the Bruttians, who had always been such a headache for Croton, become so weak? Or had the Dionian army become so powerful that it surpassed the capabilities of the Crotonian citizen soldiers? The Crotonians were at a loss. They had hoped that the outbreak of war would cause the Dionians to suffer a crushing defeat at the hands of the Bruttians, allowing Croton to profit from the situation. But now, it seemed this was merely a pleasant fantasy. The strength displayed by the Dionians left everyone present feeling chilled to the bone. "This is a good thing." General Sesprotus stood up and said loudly, "The nightmare that has plagued the people of Croton and other city-states for 100 years finally has a chance to be ended. The people of Croton will surely be overjoyed when they hear this." The words of Sesprotus made those who still harbored other intentions realize that even if they wanted to undermine the Dionians, their suggestions would likely never pass the Assembly of Citizens. At this moment, Chief General Lysias rose and said, "As a member of the South Italy Alliance, we should be happy for the victory of the Dionians. Although the Dionians did not invite Croton to participate in the war, as fellow members of the South Italy Alliance, Croton should join other allies in gifting sufficient military supplies to the Dionians to show our support." On the very day the 4th Legion launched its massive assault, the army led by me remained at the camp on the banks of the Punit River. The soldiers were busy sending the wounded back to Bycinia, while the baggage train transported the grain shipped from Thurii to Bycinia back to the camp. I was inside my tent, staring intently at a map of the Brutium region, contemplating my next move. Just then, Tormid entered. "My lord, many Brutians have arrived outside the camp. The leader, a man named Hegesidas, requests an audience with you." I felt a stir of interest and immediately said, "Bring him in at once." It turned out that the previous riot in Cosentia had been incited by Hegesidas. As the main army led by Pianluan returned from attacking the fortress, these rebel tribes, knowing they were no match, fled Cosentia in a panic. At the time, Pianluan was too busy dealing with the Dionian army to pursue them, but these tribes had brought their families and little food. Having retreated into the mountains, they suffered greatly, and after 2 days, their food supplies were nearly exhausted. Consequently, these tribes began to complain to Hegesidas, and their gazes toward him grew increasingly hostile. Just then, tribesmen sent out to scout returned with shocking news. The Brutii Tribal League had fought a great battle against the Dionians by the Punit River, resulting in a crushing defeat for the Brutians. The massive army Pianluan had led out of Cosentia had returned with almost nothing left. This news immediately changed the tribe's attitude toward Hegesidas. Hegesidas acted decisively, leading these tribes to seek refuge with the Dionian army. I did not care much about the 2,000 extra mouths to feed. I was interested in Hegesidas. This had been a casual move I had made on a whim, and I had not expected the first report from Hegesidas to exceed my expectations. I looked at the man, who possessed the features of a Greek but had a height and physique unlike those of a Greek, and a head of messy, long hair. I asked curiously, "How did you convince them?" "Archon." Hegesidas knew his opportunity had arrived. He explained in detail. Before the Brutii Tribal League was established, the large tribe of Cosentia, led by Pianluan, was constantly forcibly annexing smaller surrounding tribes. After the league was formed, to avoid the resentment of great chieftains like those of Vergae and Bycinia, Pianluan proposed the creation of a chieftains' union to gather all tribal leaders, whether they had joined voluntarily or were forced to, claiming it would manage and decide league affairs. In reality, these tribal leaders had no power at all. League affairs were decided by the Alliance Council of Elders, the Council of 7 Elders, composed of a few great chieftains and the high priest. The members of these tribes were completely broken up, forced into individual households, and managed directly by the League, while also paying taxes directly to the League every year. The tribal leaders lost all their rights and were naturally unhappy, and the warriors in the tribes were not accustomed to it either. "My lord, you should know that every one of these indigenous tribes is essentially formed by the same bloodline over hundreds of years. They are all kin who help each other in times of trouble. Now, suddenly stripped of their tribal support and forced to live independently, many warriors found their lives worse than before. Moreover, in Cosentia, they were easily bullied by the warriors of the larger tribes. Therefore, both leaders and warriors harbored resentment. I listened intently, nodding from time to time. I felt that, in fact, the measures taken by the Brutii Tribal League were even more advanced than the system of the Lacanian Tribal Alliance. They were prepared to completely dismantle the old tribal system and concentrate power highly within the League's leadership. If they truly succeeded, they would become a formidable enemy for Dionia. My lord, you spared no effort to go to war with the Brutii Tribal League to protect the Silu tribe. Hegesidas flattered me slightly before continuing. To prepare for the war, the Brutii League had to suspend the handling of the tribes that surrendered later. So, after I infiltrated Cosentia, I told them, "Dionia will defeat the Brutii League and restore your tribal rights and freedom." At this point, Hegesidas looked at me cautiously, worried that his unauthorized action might draw criticism. "You did well." I praised him. Deep down, I also hoped to do as the Brutii League had done, seize the power of the various tribes and bring all Brutians directly under Dionian rule. However, my reason told me that such a heavy-handed approach would only intensify the conflict between Greeks and Brutians, destabilizing the region and doing more harm than good for Dionia. The Brutii League, as an organization of the same race, possessed far greater strength than other tribes, yet still faced insubordination and even riots from these small tribes. If the Greeks, who had long-standing grievances with the Brutians, were to push for such centralization, the results would likely be even worse. Therefore, after conquering Brutium, I decided to implement the same strategy as in Lucania, a boiling the frog approach, promising tribal privileges on the surface while subtly exerting influence through the military and culture to eventually detach the Brutii warriors from tribal control. These tribes were initially tempted by my proposal, but were hesitant. It wasn't until your army suddenly captured Bycinia, shaking all of Cosentia, that they made up their minds. Hegesidas said excitedly, "Now that your army has dealt another heavy blow to the Brutii army, I believe this victory will have a huge impact on the situation in Cosentia." "Are you saying that a riot might break out in Cosentia again?" I asked immediately. "That is hard to say." Hegesidas thought for a moment before answering cautiously. "I heard that to prevent these tribal leaders from staying in the city and acting against the League, Pianluan specifically ordered them to lead their former tribesmen to war. When I brought the rebellious tribes here today, I hadn't heard of any abnormalities in Cosentia." I pondered for a moment and said, "Hegesidas, thank you very much for everything you have done for Dionia. I will consult you again about the situation in the Brutium region next time. Don't keep those tribal leaders waiting outside the camp gate. Bring them all in." Hegesidas said emotionally, "Archon, without your protection and that of Dionia, my people and I would not only have been unable to take revenge, but we would have long since starved to death in the mountains. We are willing to do anything for Dionia." I nodded, moved, and turned to say, "Marcius, go with him to bring those tribal leaders in. Also," I whispered to him, "make sure to lead these people past a place where the great chieftain of Vergae can see them." Sidorms was shocked to see the tribal leaders, who should have been in Cosentia, appearing in the Dionian camp. I warmly received these anxious Brutii leaders and made a solemn promise to them. As long as they joined Dionia, Dionia would not only refrain from interfering with their management of their own tribes, but would also give them priority in choosing good settlements and pastures. I even opened a map of Dionia to show them that they could choose not only within the Brutium region, but also from other available lands in the Dionian League. Reassured, the leaders happily set up tents next to the Dionian camp, preparing to help Dionia overthrow the Brutii tribal league that had oppressed them, so they could obtain the land promised by Dionia as soon as possible. After sending them off, I had a new idea. I called for Kapus and instructed him to divide the 5,000-plus captives into 200-man companies based on their tribal affiliations. I had the captives elect their own centurions and adjutants, and ordered Kapus to ensure the captives did not escape or revolt, while giving these newly elected centurions as much prestige as possible among the captives under their jurisdiction, for example, by giving them the power to distribute food, assign labor, and punish subordinates. In my plan, the future Dionian city-state alliance would have Thurii as its center, and the Brutium region, being close to Thurii, should become a core area of Dionia. However, I knew clearly that the biggest difference between the current Brutians and the Lacanians was that there were no large tribes in the Lacanian region within Dionian territory. As the situation developed, it was likely that several large Brutii tribes would exist during the conquest of Brutium, which would be an unstable factor for future Dionian rule and increase the difficulty of governing the region. My main strategy was to dismantle it, breaking the large into the small. The handling of these 5,000 captives was a preparatory step. Just as I began to take precautions for the conquest of Brutium, the situation in Cosentia was not as Hegesidas had described. It was treacherous and unpredictable. Catararchy, a chieftain of Cosentia, had a tribe whose strength was originally on par with that of Petaru. But since Petaru became Pianluan's son-in-law, things had changed. In the process of incorporating and annexing small tribes, Petaru's tribe, supported by Pianluan, gained many benefits, and its strength expanded rapidly. Not only did it quickly become the second-largest tribe in Cosentia, and even all of Brutium, but Petaru, with Pianluan's promotion, also entered the highest power organ of the newly established Brutii Tribal League, the Council of Seven Elders. Catararchy felt angry and dissatisfied with Pianluan's unfairness, but the power of Pianluan and Petaru's tribes forced him to put on a smiling face and obey. Take this time, for instance. Pianluan led the largest army in Brutii history to fight the Dionians, leaving him to guard Cosentia, and he had no choice but to accept it. Even as the temporary master of Cosentia, Kadorki did not have absolute power, because he knew that the high priest Faladaru, whom he secretly mocked as Pianluan's dog, was watching him closely. If he made any move, a single order from Faladaru could cause half of the 2,000 warriors under his command to disobey him. The other half, of course, were his own kin. With the army gone, Kosincha was mostly empty, and affairs were naturally greatly reduced. Kadorki spent most of the day bored in the League's council hall in the inner city, until a guard reported. The Brudii League had been defeated, and the routed troops were entering the city one after another. Although they had discussed the possibility of defeat before the expedition, Kadorki felt great shock upon hearing the news. He rushed to the east gate of the outer city, and the scene before him was unbelievable. The area outside the gate was crowded with disheveled, exhausted, defeated soldiers. They had no helmets, had discarded their leather shields and spears, and some were even naked and covered in mud. They looked back in panic while scrambling to enter the city. At the slightest sign of trouble, they would panic, leading to crazy pushing and shoving. Some were even pushed into the moat, screaming. Once they entered the city, they would immediately lie on the ground and fall into a deep sleep. Kadorki had seen many battles and suffered defeats, but he had never seen such a miserable sight. He was secretly alarmed and immediately mobilized troops to the gate to maintain order and rescue the wounded. Not long after, he saw Pianluan. The great chieftain of Kosincha no longer had the high spirits he had when he set out. His eyes were dull, his expression vacant, and his hands were tightly clutching his horse's neck. The horse was clearly exhausted to the limit, moving forward inch by inch, struggling with every step, until it suddenly collapsed on all fours, throwing the unsuspecting Pianluan to the ground. The accompanying guards rushed to help him up. Pianluan, who had been jolted on horseback for over an hour, was equally exhausted in body and mind, his limbs weak. He could barely stand with the help of his guards. Seeing Kadorki, he said weakly, be careful of the enemy's surprise attack," and was then carried into the city by his guards. Seeing Pianluan in such a sorry state, Kadorki felt a strange, gloating joy in his tense and uneasy heart, a feeling that reached its peak when he saw Petaru. Petaru, 20 years younger than Pianluan, was physically much better off than his father-in-law, but mentally, he had clearly been terrified by the fierce pursuit of the Dionian cavalry. He was so mentally unstable when he entered the city that he shouted uncontrollably in front of the many routed soldiers. "The enemy is coming. The enemy is coming. Close the gates. Close the gates," nearly causing a major riot. Kadorki used all his might to restore order, cursing Petaru as an idiot in his heart, while also feeling a sense of fear toward the Dionians he had yet to meet. That night, Kadorki remained on high alert. Defeated soldiers continued to flee back into the city, and the people of Kosincha, upon learning the bad news, wept throughout the night. The entire city was restless all night long. By the next morning, many more routed soldiers were still fleeing back to the city. In the council hall of the inner city, Pianluan, having regained his energy and temporarily emerged from the shadow of yesterday's crushing defeat, now wore a grave expression. So far, only about 2,000 warriors belonging to his and Petaru's tribes had returned, along with over 700 Ambalia warriors and about 1,000 Vergay warriors. The largest number of returnees were warriors from other small tribes, totaling over 4,000. What did this mean? It meant that as the first and second largest tribes of the Brudians, about 8,000 men were either killed or captured by the Dionians. Such a staggering number not only caused him and Petaru immense pain, but also gave their tribesmen reasons to attack them, threatening their rule within the tribe. More importantly, the Brudii Tribal League was likely facing disintegration because Pianluan, having lost his strength, had also lost his influence and appeal within the league. Just a moment ago, Bojamu, the great chieftain of Ambalia, had rejected Pianluan's repeated pleas and left Kosincha with his remaining tribesmen. Even though Pianluan's argument was sound, the city of Ambalia is simple and cannot withstand a Dionian attack. It would be better to temporarily move the Ambalians to Kosincha and fight side by side. Bojamu had replied heroically, "The Ambalians have lived in Ambalia for generations. We will not abandon our land. Even if we die, we will spill our blood there." The departure of the Ambalians affected the Vergay warriors, who had lost their own great chieftain. They clamored to go home as well, and Pianluan only managed to convince them to stay by promising to do his utmost to rescue Sidorums. The problem with the Vergay warriors was minor. The biggest problem was that after Pianluan returned to Cosentia last night, due to the dual blow of mental and physical exhaustion, he had fallen asleep immediately, causing him to forget to make specific deployments and arrangements for the other tribal leaders who had gone to war. As a result, after these tribal leaders fled back to Cosentia, they did not return to their residences in the inner city, but hid in their original tribal settlements in the outer city. After a night had passed, Pianluan realized he had made a huge mistake and hurriedly sent his men with a squad of warriors to urge them to return. But his worst fear had come to pass. The warriors were driven out and reported to him, bruised and battered. Great Chieftain Tajalu and the others refused to return to the inner city and are threatening to lead their tribes out of Cosentia. These guys have a lot of nerve. Do they want to riot? Petaru, having rested for a night, had recovered his spirit. He angrily requested of Pianluan, "Great Chieftain, let me take 1,000 warriors to bring them back." Pianluan's furrowed brow formed deep ridges. He shook his head, unclenched his fists, turned to look at the High Priest Faladaru, and said in a deep voice, "High Priest, I must ask you to go. Ask them what their demands are, and try to stabilize them." "Great Chieftain," Petaru shouted hurriedly, "you must not be soft on these guys. Otherwise they will slip out of our control and might even threaten the safety of Cosentia." Pianluan, Petaru, and Falataru gathered in the hall. Overwhelmed with regret, Pianluan lamented that the battle's failure was his fault. He confessed that his overconfidence in their terrain advantage and light equipment had led to catastrophic losses, realizing too late that Dionia was far superior to other Greek city-states. Petaru comforted his father-in-law, noting that the decision to fight was collective. He tentatively suggested seeking peace with Dionia. Pianluan and Faladaru were stunned by the suggestion. Faladaru expressed skepticism that Dionia would agree to a truce. Inspired, Pianluan decided to try. He instructed Petaru to send an envoy to offer Cosenza's alliance, similar to the status of Laos. He hoped that by becoming a vassal, they could secure the release of captives and gain time to stabilize the city and suppress internal unrest. The Cosenza envoy arrived at the Dionian camp, but I flatly rejected the offer, insisting that Cosenza must be fully incorporated into the Dionian League. I refused further negotiation, unwilling to grant Cosenza any respite while I held the absolute advantage. 3 days post-battle, the Dionian army marched west. Cavalry scouted ahead, the 1st Legion led the vanguard, and the 2nd Legion protected the supply, medical, and engineering units. Bruttii captives were forced to carry supplies, while the reserves and allies brought up the rear. 3 hours later, I reached the outskirts of Cosenza. Cavalry Captain Lades arrived, reporting that the 4th Legion was approaching. I was delighted and rode forward to meet them, my guard and cavalry closing in to ensure my safety. 4th Legate Silas arrived from the south, saluting me and confirming the capture of Nepetia. I returned the salute, noting how Silas had matured from a simple mercenary into a dignified and capable Dionian legate. Silas expressed grief, reporting that the defense of Nepetia had cost 700 men. I reassured him, taking responsibility for the strategy and praising the sacrifice as a valuable military lesson in storming fortified cities. I then rode forward to greet the 4th Legion. I and Silas led the way, followed by 200 guards, including 100 Bycinia warriors. Rodum followed closely behind me, carrying the glorious flag entrusted to him by Marcius. As they passed, the 4th Legion soldiers stood in silent awe. I saluted them solemnly. The soldiers erupted in thunderous cheers. Victory to Dionia. Victory to Davos. Rodum felt inspired, realizing that a man's life should be spent on the battlefield rather than in obscurity. 1st Legion veterans looked on with disdain, dismissing the 4th Legion's cheers as the excitement of novices who only succeeded because the 1st Legion had already crushed the main Bruttii force. On the city walls, the Bruttii watched in terror as the 2 massive Dionian columns united. Pianluan, having failed to suppress news of Nepetia's fall, saw the demoralizing effect this display had on his troops. Tajalu seized the moment to suggest surrender, arguing that their numbers were insufficient to defend such a large city. Petaru restrained his anger. Under Faladaru's mediation, they had recently reconciled with the tribal leaders, promising to restore their rights in exchange for a united defense. However, tension remained over the demand to abolish the Council of Elders in favor of a chieftain's union. Pianluan had stalled this demand by citing the absence of Bojemu and Sidorums, leaving the factions in a fragile, superficial peace. With the Dionian army at their gates and internal strife brewing, Pianluan was desperate. I did not attack immediately. Instead, I began building a siege camp 1 mile from the city, leveraging my 30,000-strong force to blockade Kazensa. Captives were put to work digging trenches, while the various legions maintained a constant, vigilant watch. As I prepared to scout the city, Kapuz reported that Sidorums requested an audience. I calmly asked Sidorums if he had truly decided to bring Vergay into the Dionian League. Sidorums confirmed his decision, realizing after seeing the 4th Legion that Dionia's siege capabilities were insurmountable. I asked how he intended to proceed. Empty, Sidorums explained that he could not simply surrender at the gates, as his people would view him as a coward and resist further. Instead, he proposed returning to Vergay to convince the leaders and warriors to join the siege, arguing this would be more beneficial to Dionia. I smiled and asked how long the journey would take. Sidorums replied, "Half a day on foot, less than 3 hours by horse." I ordered him to leave immediately, expecting the Vergay leaders at the camp by the next day. Sidorums bowed in obedience, and I summoned Marcius. "Take some guards and escort Great Chieftain Sidorums safely outside Vergay. Once Avanogus sees me, he won't block the Great Chieftain's entry. Also, tell the Archon of Laos to bring his troops and the Vergay army here tomorrow." Understood. Marcius hesitated. "But sir, what about you here? Don't worry. With the other guards and the Bycinia warriors led by Rotem, I'll be perfectly fine." "Yes." After Sidorums left, Tormid asked, "Commander, aren't you worried he's lying?" I watched Sidorums depart with a complex expression. Sidorums is a smart man. There's one thing he intentionally omitted. Tormid realized, the Vergay prisoners in the camp. They are his hostages. If he abandons his people to flee, the Vergay will know. He's playing a deep game. I smiled. I don't care if he's lying. He can't change the war's outcome, and his actions just give me a reason to wipe out the Vergay. The night passed peacefully. The next day, a sleepless Pianluan rushed to the walls, expecting a Dionian assault. No attack came. The Dionians were still fortifying their camp. Unbeknownst to Pianluan, I had sent the 1st Legion to attack Ambania, accompanied by ballista units and Hegesidas. By noon, the defenders of Cosentia watched in horror as a 1,000-strong force carrying Vergay banners marched around the city before entering the Dionian camp, followed by 2,000 troops from Laos doing the same. The Brutii warriors were shaken. Vergay had surrendered. Seeing their own great chieftain Sidorums leading the column, the Vergay soldiers inside Cosentia clamored to join them, clashing with the Cosentian guards. Pianluan was trapped. With only 5,000 Cosentian troops and the Dionian army looming outside, he couldn't suppress the 800 Vergay. Other chieftains, led by Tajalu, refused to fight, citing that Brutii must not kill Brutii. Outside, tribes that had previously rioted gathered to call for surrender. As the chieftains wavered, Bojayamu of Ambania arrived with his cavalry. Ambania's surrender hit the city hard. Faced with 7,000 Dionians and ballistae shattering their gates, Bojayamu had made the only logical choice. Cosentia was now an isolated island, completely surrounded. Tajalu and the other chieftains finally decided to open the gates. Dionian soldiers flooded in, forcing Pianluan, Petaru, and Katawarki to retreat into the inner city amidst chaos. Petaru stumbled into the council hall. "Great chieftain," he cried. Katawarki opened the gates and surrendered. "What should we do?" Pianluan sat calmly. "Surrender to the Dionians," he said quietly. Petaru didn't hesitate and hurried out to comply. "Petaru," Pianluan called him back. "You are too impulsive. Think before you act, and take care of Una." "Father." Petaru felt uneasy. Pianluan waved him off. "Go. Too many of our people have died already." Pianluan turned to the Brutii League flag on the wall, a snowy peak over green plains. representing their land, and the god Umla. He touched the flag, mourning the unified Brutii dream he had built. He cursed Dionia, unaware that in another timeline, the Brutii would become a kingdom that crushed the Greeks and resisted Rome. As he wrapped himself in the flag and drew his dagger to commit suicide, Hegesippus's third legion arrived at Pixus, which surrendered immediately. Hearing this, Pomote of Potentia sent envoys to Thurii to join the Dionian alliance. A month later, Metapontum and Garagusso joined as well. The Dionian city-state alliance now controlled over half of southern Italy and Lucania, becoming the region's hegemon. Note: historically, the Brutii were once vassals to the Lucanians before forming a kingdom. The weakness of Greek cities under Dionysius of Syracuse facilitated their rise. Their territory eventually covered most of Calabria. In this story, Dionia's rise interrupted the ascent of both the Brutii and the Lucanians. The next volume involves more Mediterranean powers, complex diplomacy, and grander warfare. I will take a day to organize my thoughts before starting Volume 6, The Duel of Heroes. Stay tuned. When news of the Dionian conquest reached Syracuse, Dionysius was inspecting his fortifications with Margus. Upon hearing the news, his face darkened. "Damn Carthaginians, they've ruined my plans." In early 397 BC, the Carthaginian Safite Zimiurk led a 100,000-strong army to Sicily. After minor naval skirmishes, they landed, bribed traders, and captured Eryx before successfully storming Motia. The Syracusan army abandoned the siege of Segesta. Zimiurk destroyed Motia and built a new city nearby called Lilybaeum. As the Carthaginian army halted, the cautious Dionysius remained entrenched in Syracuse. In February, after establishing the new city of Lilybaeum, Hamilco marched east. Bypassing his previous route, he sailed to Sicily's northeast corner and easily seized the undefended Messana. Messana's fall alarmed Rhegium, a wealthy Magna Graecia city-state that relied on transit trade and had secretly courted Carthage to deter Syracusan aggression. Messana, originally Zancle, founded by Cumi and Chalcis, and later renamed after Messenian immigrants, had established Rhegium as a sister city to secure the strait. Panicked, Rhegium joined the South Italy alliance. Now, every Greek city-state in Magna Graecia, save for Locri and its dependents, was allied with Dionia. After razing Messana, Hamilco prepared to build Tauromenium nearby, intending to gift it to the native Sicels to secure their support against Syracuse. By March, fearing his allies would defect to Carthage, Dionysius marched his land and naval forces north to the Catania plain. Off the coast of Catana, the Syracusan navy suffered a crushing defeat due to the incompetence of Dionysius's brother, Leptins, who served as naval commander despite the Greeks' superior numbers and equipment. The Greek land forces, watching from the shore, were demoralized by the naval disaster. Fortunately, Hamilco's army was delayed. Mount Etna erupted, spewing lava and ash that blocked the southern roads and forced the Carthaginians to detour. Chanting hymns to Hephaestus, the Syracusan army retreated to Syracuse, leaving Catana and Leontini to fall to Carthage. Capitalizing on his naval victory, Hamilco reached Syracuse, entered the Great Harbor, and established a camp along the Alipus River to besiege the city. Dionysius frantically dispatched envoys to Campania, Corinth, and Sparta for aid, pointedly ignoring the Dionian League in southern Italy. Dionia, needing time to consolidate its recent expansions, refrained from intervening uninvited, leaving the Dionians and other southern Italians to watch the crisis unfold from across the sea. Greek reinforcements arrived, notably the Spartan commander Phoebidas with 30 triremes and 500 Spartan warriors.